He slid the thick manila envelope across the kitchen's marble island. "Sign them, Elena." Silas did not even look at me. He was too busy adjusting the French cuffs of his bespoke suit after 7 years of marriage. This was how he delivered the divorce papers. He tapped his phone screen, dialing my mother on speakerphone. When she answered, he smirked. "Vivian, come fetch your useless daughter. I am done carrying her." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just checked my watch. 1 minute later, the low rumble of heavy engines rattled the crystal glasses in the cupboards. 6 matte black, armored sport utility vehicles surrounded Silas's driveway, boxing in his Porsche. He smiled, glancing out the window, assuming it was the private security detail of his wealthy new lover arriving for a celebration. But when the lead vehicle's reinforced door swung open, the color instantly drained from his face. My mother stepped onto his pristine driveway, flanked by 4 armed asset recovery agents in tactical gear. He thought he was discarding a meek, uneducated data entry clerk. He had no idea he had just declared war on the heiress to a global private intelligence firm, and he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire life. If you have ever had someone mistake your silence for weakness, only to find out they woke a sleeping giant, this story is for you. Drop a comment with where you are tuning in from, and hit that subscribe button to see exactly how this trap closes. Silas stepped back from the window. His hand dropped. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the polished hardwood floor. The engine rumble outside vibrated through the floorboards, a physical weight pressing into the foundation of the house. Footsteps sounded on the front porch, heavy, synchronized, deliberate. The front door did not swing open with a dramatic crash. It unlatched with a quiet, terrifying click. My mother, Vivian, crossed the threshold. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat, her posture razor straight. 4 men in unmarked tactical uniforms filed in behind her, fanning out to secure the foyer. They did not speak. They did not draw weapons. Their mere presence swallowed the oxygen in the room. They moved with the silent, lethal efficiency of a military unit, their eyes scanning the perimeter, instantly assessing Silas as a non-threat. Silas retreated until his spine hit the stainless steel refrigerator. He opened his mouth, but no sound materialized. The arrogant investment fund manager who, just 90 seconds prior, had demanded my removal like a piece of defective furniture, now looked entirely hollow. His shoulders curled inward. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. Vivian stopped at the edge of the kitchen island. She did not look at him. She looked at the divorce papers resting near my hands. "Elena," she said. Her voice carried the chill of an open vault. "Are you ready?" "Yes." I pushed my dining chair back and stood up. For 7 years, I had moved through this house with quiet apologies, keeping my gaze lowered, shrinking my footprint so Silas could occupy all the available space. He claimed he bought this sprawling estate for our future. Yet he meticulously kept my name off the deed. Every asset, every account, every piece of art on the walls was structured to ensure my total dependency. I stopped shrinking. I squared my shoulders, retrieved my laptop from the counter, and walked toward the door. Silas finally found his voice. It cracked, pitching an octave higher than his usual practiced baritone. "What is this? Who are these people?" I paused beside my mother. I looked at the man I had married in 2018. I noted his racing pulse, the sweat beading near his hairline, the frantic darting of his eyes as he assessed the 4 imposing men occupying his pristine hallway. "They are the extraction team," I replied calmly. "Extraction?" He gripped the edge of the marble counter, his knuckles turning white. "You cannot just leave. You have to sign the papers." You owe. Vivian raised a single hand, 2 inches. The gesture silenced him instantly. My daughter owes you nothing, she stated. Do not attempt to contact her. Do not attempt to follow her. I walked out the front door. I did not go upstairs. I did not pack a suitcase. I abandoned the walk-in closet, full of restrictive labels Silas had purchased to mold me into an acceptable accessory for his corporate dinners. I left behind the jewelry, the high heels, the curated life of a passive wife. None of it belonged to me anyway. It was a costume, and the performance had officially concluded. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks. It was October 2nd, 2025. The afternoon sun cast long, sharp shadows across the driveway. An agent held the rear door of the lead sport utility vehicle open. I slid into the leather seat. Vivian followed, and the heavy door slammed shut, sealing us in soundproof silence. The convoy pulled away, navigating the manicured suburban streets with military precision, leaving Silas standing in his doorway, watching a fleet of tactical vehicles dissolve into the distance. Inside the cabin, the tinted windows blocked out the world. Vivian did not offer a comforting hug. She did not ask if my heart felt broken. We did not operate on that frequency. She reached into her leather briefcase, extracted an encrypted tablet, and passed it across the center console. He filed for a fault divorce, she noted, her tone shifting seamlessly to pure business. He is citing financial abandonment and demanding you absorb a portion of his fabricated corporate debts. I powered on the tablet. The screen glowed, casting a stark blue light across my face. He thinks I am a data entry clerk. He assumes I will panic, hire a cheap attorney, and fold during mediation. And what will you do? I keyed in my security credentials. The login prompt for the Adler Global Risk mainframe flashed on the screen. For 7 years, I had hidden my true identity from my husband. I had suppressed my background as a senior forensic auditor and the sole heiress to a corporate intelligence empire that moved global financial markets. I had wanted a normal life. I had wanted a marriage built on mutual affection, not leverage and fear. Instead, Silas exploited my manufactured mediocrity. He treated my assumed lack of ambition as a mirror to reflect his own brilliance. The mainframe authenticated my biometrics. Lines of code cascaded down the screen, unlocking the firm's global tracking protocols. The meek, subservient wife ceased to exist. I felt the familiar. Clinical clarity returned to my mind, a cold, calculating precision taking root. I will not hire an attorney, I said, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard. I am going to audit him. Vivian gave a slight, approving nod. Begin with his offshore accounts. I want his financial footprint mapped by midnight. I initiated the first trace protocol. The tablet hummed as it bypassed standard firewalls, pulling Silas's public tax filings and cross-referencing them against global corporate registries. Silas believed he was a master manipulator, discarding a useless burden. He did not realize he had just invited the most ruthless financial predator in the hemisphere to examine his books. The ambush he planned had failed. My hunt had just begun. The armored sport utility vehicle accelerated onto the interstate, leaving the manicured boundaries of my former life behind. I watched the digital landscape of Silas's financial history cascade down my tablet screen. To dismantle him effectively, I needed to catalog exactly how he built his ego. The foundation of his delusion rested on a single, deliberate lie I told him in 2018. I was 27 years old when we met at a charity gala in Manhattan. Growing up as an Adler meant living under a microscope. Everyone I encountered possessed a hidden agenda. Suitors did not want me. They wanted proximity to the Adler Global Risk boardroom. They wanted access to the staggering wealth and the geopolitical leverage my mother wielded. I suffocated under the weight of their calculation. I craved an authentic connection. I wanted to be chosen for the person I was, rather than the empire I stood to inherit. When Silas approached me near the coat check, he possessed a polished, hungry ambition. He was 29, an associate fund manager, clawing his way up the corporate ladder. He asked what I did for a living. I gave him the cover story I utilized to filter out opportunists. I do data entry for a logistics firm, I told him. I watched his posture transform. The tension vanished from his jaw. His shoulders dropped. A satisfied, protective dominance settled over his features. He did not see a competitor. He did not see a threat. He saw a blank canvas. He saw an accessory he could easily outshine. I accepted his proposal 18 months later. I believed that his desire to be the provider stemmed from traditional affection. I assumed the patronizing tone he occasionally adopted would fade as our partnership deepened. I miscalculated entirely. Over the next 7 years, Silas weaponized my manufactured mediocrity. As his career advanced, his arrogance mutated. He required a subservient audience to sustain his inflated self-image. My supposed lack of ambition became the cornerstone of his identity. He treated me less like a partner and more like a domestic assistant holding a permanent, front-row ticket to his brilliance. The psychological suppression functioned like a slow tightening vice. I endured it in silence, convinced that keeping the peace was the price of a normal marriage. I recall a specific dinner party we hosted in 2024. Silas invited 3 senior partners from his investment firm. I spent the afternoon orchestrating the catering, managing the floral arrangements, and ensuring the estate projected the exact image of unbothered wealth he demanded. During the main course, a partner named Gregory turned his attention to me. Silas tells me you work in logistics. Elena, tracking supply chains. Before I could form a syllable, Silas cut across the table, waving his wine glass dismissively. Elena just inputs the raw numbers. Greg, Silas interjected, chuckling. We do not burden her with the analytics. She leaves the heavy lifting to the professionals. The table erupted in polite, synchronized laughter. I sat perfectly still. I gripped the stem of my water goblet, pressing my thumbnail into my index finger until the skin turned white. Silas then launched into an unprompted lecture about a complex offshore tax structuring mechanism he claimed to have pioneered for a client in the Cayman Islands. He mapped out the strategy, boasting about exploiting regulatory loopholes. I listened to him speak. Within 45 seconds, my mind clinically dissected his entire model. I identified 3 catastrophic structural flaws, a blatant violation of federal compliance statutes, and a currency exposure risk that would inevitably trigger a Securities and Exchange Commission audit. His brilliant strategy was nothing more than an amateur liability trap. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I did not correct him. I did not point out that his shell company structure lacked the necessary indemnification clauses. I simply offered a blank, pleasant smile, stood from the table, and collected the empty salad plates. I played the role he assigned me, swallowing my intellect to protect his fragile pride. He assumed my silence indicated ignorance. He never suspected it required every ounce of my willpower to stop myself from entirely humiliating him in front of his superiors. Silas believed I spent my days staring at spreadsheets, organizing his dry cleaning, and planning his social calendar. He believed I possessed no understanding of the world operating outside our front door. He had no idea what I actually did when he left the house. Every morning, after Silas's Porsche pulled out of the driveway, I retreated to my private study. I locked the heavy oak door. I retrieved an encrypted biometric terminal hidden inside a false compartment in my bookcase. I did not do data entry. I was the lead forensic auditor for Adler Global Risk. While Silas took 3-hour lunches and played golf to secure low-tier investment accounts, I tracked missing millions across international borders. I traced offshore embezzlement networks for the Fortune 500. I penetrated corporate firewalls, untangling webs of Panamanian shell entities and Swiss cantonal bank transfers. I mapped the financial architecture of international syndicates. Handing the blueprints over to federal agencies, I hunted predators who hid behind complex financial jargon. I dismantled entire organizations before noon, utilizing nothing but a keyboard and a clinical intellect. Silas slept next to a human lie detector, entirely oblivious to the danger. His arrogance blinded him, because he viewed me as a useless dependent. He grew sloppy. He treated his home like a sanctuary where his brilliance remained unchallenged. He left his work laptop open on the kitchen counter. He took supposed client calls on the terrace, speaking loudly. Confident I lacked the vocabulary to decipher his conversations. He dropped bank statements in the recycling bin without a second thought. He orchestrated his illicit affairs and his financial crimes right in front of me, assuming the data entry clerk possessed neither the vision to see the patterns nor the courage to question them. He was profoundly wrong. I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing myself back to the present moment inside the moving vehicle. The trace protocol I initiated had completed its preliminary sweep. Silas's public tax records populated the display. I aligned them against the real estate holdings registered to his name. The numbers immediately fractured. Silas reported a moderate, stable income to the Internal Revenue Service, yet his lifestyle the bespoke suits. The Porsche. The sprawling estate required an influx of capital entirely absent from his legitimate ledgers. A man reporting his listed salary could not afford the maintenance fees on his country club membership, let alone a sudden, aggressive divorce filing aimed at assigning me fabricated marital debt. I opened a secondary terminal window. I keyed in the parameters for a deep web asset search, instructing the Adler algorithm to scour for newly formed limited liability companies bearing his digital signature. I was no longer the quiet wife collecting salad plates. I was the auditor. And the subject of my investigation had just handed me full authorization to tear his world apart. I watched the progress bar on the screen fill. The illusion was over. Silas believed he held all the cards. He did not realize I owned the table. The armored convoy descended into the subterranean parking matrix of Adler Global Risk Headquarters. Concrete pillars and security barricades slid past the tinted windows. When the vehicle stopped, I bypassed the standard employee elevators and followed Vivian into the executive biometric lift. The scanner registered my retina, verifying my clearance level, and propelled us upward to the 42nd floor. We stepped into the war room. The space functioned as the nerve center of the firm. Floor-to-ceiling smart glass lined the perimeter, currently frosted opaque to block the Manhattan skyline. The ambient temperature hovered at a crisp 68 degrees to keep the server arrays running optimally. The air smelled of ozone and filtered ventilation. In the center of the room sat an expansive, illuminated glass table. I approached the table, unclasped my leather briefcase, and extracted the manila envelope Silas had slid across our kitchen island just an hour prior. I did not retreat to a quiet corner to weep. I did not search for tissues or pour a glass of wine to soothe a shattered heart. I operated within my element. I approached the thick stack of legal documents the same way a medical examiner approaches a forensic slab. I dumped the contents onto the illuminated glass. I separated the pages, aligning them edge to edge until Silas's entire exit strategy lay exposed in a perfect grid. I leaned over the table, bracing my hands against the cool glass, and began to read. I read the petition for dissolution, the asset declarations, and the attached financial addendums. Silas had utilized a high-priced litigator. But the underlying strategy reeked of his personal arrogance. He viewed the divorce as a hostile corporate takeover, attempting to bury me under a mountain of synthetic liability. He had deliberately triggered a specific predatory insolvency clause buried deep within the prenuptial agreement we signed back in 2018. At the time, He pushed the contract across a restaurant table, framing it as a standard formality required by his investment partners to shield the fund from marital disputes. I signed it without objection, fully aware my own family's monumental wealth remained permanently sheltered in blind trusts he could never access. He thought he was protecting his empire from a logistics clerk. Now, he wielded that same document as a weapon. According to the sworn affidavit resting under my fingertips, Silas claimed his primary investment vehicle, Hayes Capital, stood on the brink of total insolvency. He declared his personal liquid assets at absolute zero. He painted a picture of a desperate man destroyed by market volatility. Then, I reached the final page. I read the settlement demand. Silas formally requested the family court assign me $150,000 of fabricated joint marital debt. He categorized the liabilities as unsecured personal loans supposedly utilized for household maintenance and shared living expenses. He offered to waive his right to my meager data entry pension if I absorbed the debt without contesting the filing. I straightened my posture, staring at the typed numbers. The strategy was brutally transparent. He expected me to panic. He assumed I lacked the financial literacy to challenge his sworn declarations or the resources to hire a forensic accountant. He anticipated I would sign the waiver immediately, accepting the ruinous debt just to escape the psychological torment of a protracted legal battle. He planned to walk away unburdened, leaving me financially crippled. I pressed a key on the edge of the table, activating the overhead projectors. The glass surface beneath the documents flared to life, transforming into a massive interactive monitor. "Link the mainframe to the table," I instructed the room's voice-activated interface. "Access the primary trace protocol initiated in the vehicle. Project Silas Hayes, personal and corporate ledgers." Columns of data flooded the illuminated glass, surrounding the physical divorce papers. "He claims zero liquidity," I noted, speaking to the empty room as my eyes scanned the cascading numbers. "He claims Hayes Capital is hemorrhaging capital." I dragged a digital window across the table, expanding his personal expenditure reports from the past fiscal year. A fund manager facing genuine insolvency alters his behavioral patterns. He liquidates secondary assets. He cuts discretionary spending. He attempts to quietly stop the bleeding before the regulatory agencies notice the drop in capital reserves. Silas exhibited zero financial distress. He renewed the lease on his Porsche 3 months ago. He maintained his monthly dues at the elite Westchester Country Club. He continued to purchase bespoke suits. A man holding zero liquid assets does not swipe a premium titanium credit card for a $2,000 dinner at a midtown steakhouse, as Silas had done just last Tuesday. His lifestyle actively contradicted his sworn legal filing. He was lying to the court, which meant he possessed a hidden reservoir of capital. I needed to find the leak. I filtered the data stream, eliminating the static noise. I stripped away the mortgage payments, the utility drafts, the vehicle leases, and the grocery expenses. I isolated the outbound cash flow, searching for anomalies in the transaction architecture. I utilized the Adler algorithm to flag any repeating transfers moving outside his established network of vendors and partners. The data sifted, categorized, and reduced. The columns shrank until a single, glaring pattern remained isolated on the glowing glass. I leaned closer. My eyes locked onto a recurring line item. $12,000. The transfer initiated on the first day of every month, executed via an automated wire draft from a secondary checking account Silas maintained under an obscure holding company. I traced the origin back 14 months, 14 consecutive transfers. He had funneled $168,000 out of his accounts. I dragged my index finger across the glass, highlighting the recipient block. The funds consistently landed in a commercial account registered to an entity named Quinn Strategic Services. I stopped moving, Consulting fees represented a standard expenditure in the investment sector. Firms routinely contracted outside analysts, risk assessors, and market strategists. However, corporate consulting fees belonged on the corporate ledger. They functioned as tax-deductible business expenses. Silas was routing this specific $12,000 payment through a deeply buried personal holding account, bypassing his firm's compliance officers. He deliberately absorbed the tax penalty to keep the transfers hidden from his own accountants. A legitimate business owner does not hide a vendor. A husband does not conceal a consulting firm unless the consultant provides a service entirely unrelated to the financial markets. I picked up a red dry erase marker from the metal tray at the edge of the table. I uncapped it. I leaned over the divorce petition Silas had signed, the document where he swore he possessed zero liquid assets and demanded I shoulder $150,000 of his debt. I drew a thick red circle directly on the glass monitor, boxing in the name Quinn Strategic Services. The marker squeaked against the slick surface, a sharp, defining sound in the silent room. I looked at my hand holding the marker. It did not tremble. It did not shake with grief or betrayal. My pulse remained at a steady, rhythmic, resting pace. The woman who would have cried over a broken marriage vanished completely, replaced by an apex predator locking onto a blood trail. He thought he could bury me under fraudulent debt. He thought he could outsmart the legal system, the tax authorities, and the quiet woman who organized his dry cleaning. I set the marker down. I felt the cold, familiar clarity of a hunt beginning. I knew exactly where to strike next. I stepped back from the glass table, leaving the thick red circle hovering over the name Quinn Strategic Services. I accessed the primary command console. My fingers struck the keys, initiating a comprehensive corporate entity sweep across all 50 states. The Adler Global Risk Architecture bypassed standard search engines, plunging directly into state tax boards, registries of deeds, and federal trademark filings. Within 12 seconds, the system retrieved a match. The entity operated as a single-member limited liability company registered in Nevada. I pulled the articles of organization. The registered agent listed on the incorporation documents was Mallory Quinn. I dragged her name into the personnel subroutine. The screen divided, populating the left quadrant with public records, voter registrations, and credit histories. Mallory Quinn, 29 years old. No prior history in high-level finance. No degree in economics or market strategy. She listed her occupation as a freelance wealth consultant. A wealth consultant who materialized out of nowhere 14 months ago, aligning perfectly with the exact moment Silas initiated the first automated wire transfer. I cracked my knuckles, the sound echoing sharply in the climate-controlled room. I needed to see her. I diverted the search protocol, targeting her digital footprint. Amateurs invariably crave validation. They document their crimes, mistaking exposure for success. I breached her public social media platforms. The glass table transformed into a mosaic of high-resolution images. Mallory Quinn did not secure her accounts. She operated an influencer-style profile, documenting a meteoric rise from obscurity to extreme luxury. I scrolled through the chronological feed. 16 months ago, she posted photos from a cramped studio apartment, drinking discount wine from a chipped glass. 14 months ago, the precise month Silas routed the first $12,000 out of his accounts, the scenery shifted dramatically. Suddenly, Mallory posed in 5-star hotel lobbies. She photographed designer handbags resting on the passenger seats of European sports cars. She geotagged exclusive resorts in the Maldives, ski chalets in Aspen, and private cabanas in St. Barthélemy. I extracted the hidden metadata from every image. I captured the timestamps, the global positioning coordinates, and the device identifiers. I pulled Silas's corporate travel calendar from his intercepted emails and cross-referenced the two datasets. The overlap hit with mathematical precision. When Silas told me he attended a 3-day risk management seminar in Chicago last November, Mallory uploaded a video of herself clinking champagne flutes on a balcony overlooking the Magnificent Mile. When Silas claimed he flew to London to negotiate a corporate merger in April, Mallory posted a selfie from a Mayfair boutique, geotagged on the exact same afternoon. He did not merely discard me. He funded a parallel existence. He utilized my quiet compliance to anchor his domestic life. Weaponizing my trust while he financed his mistress with capital he legally swore he lacked. I continued scrolling. A recent post commanded my attention. She uploaded it 72 hours ago. Mallory lounged on the teak deck of a luxury motor yacht. She held a crystal coupe filled with vintage champagne, smiling over the rim at the camera. The caption read, "Sailing into our new chapter." I isolated the image. I commanded the software to enhance the resolution. I ignored Mallory entirely. Bypassing her designer swimsuit and her boastful caption, I magnified the background behind her left shoulder. A life preserver hung on a stainless steel railing. The vessel's official registration numbers curved along the white vinyl. I typed the alphanumeric sequence into the International Maritime Registry database. The system scanned global shipping manifests, Coast Guard records, and private ownership logs. It returned a definitive hit. The vessel, a 65-foot luxury cruiser, carried a purchase price of $4.5 million. It did not belong to a charter company. It belonged to a holding entity named Apex Horizon. I pivoted back to the corporate registry interface. I hunted Apex Horizon. The trail wound through a complex labyrinth of privacy shields. The entity functioned as a shell corporation registered in Delaware. I deployed Adler Global's highest-tier clearance algorithms, piercing the corporate veil. I stripped away the registered agents and the proxy directors. I dug straight into the foundational filing documents submitted to the Delaware Division of Corporations. The origin document appeared on my screen. Signature Silas Hayes. Date of formation exactly 3 weeks ago. I stared at the glowing ink. The puzzle pieces locked together, forming a horrifying, unassailable picture. Silas funneled $12,000 a month to Mallory. That covered her luxury shopping and her international travel. But $12,000 a month does not purchase a $4.5 million yacht. It does not fund a Delaware shell corporation holding offshore maritime assets. Silas managed a mid-tier investment fund. He collected management fees and carried interest. He did not possess the personal liquidity to purchase a superyacht outright, especially while draining his primary accounts to sustain Mallory's lifestyle, unless he utilized capital that did not belong to him. The realization crystallized, cold and absolute in my mind. Silas was not merely a narcissistic husband fabricating debt to bully his wife in family court. He was an active corporate criminal. He was bypassing his firm's escrows. He was bleeding the retirement accounts, the municipal pensions, and the private equity of his own clients to construct a shadow empire. He was operating a Ponzi scheme. The conflict shifted entirely. This ceased to be a domestic dispute. It escalated instantly into massive, federal financial fraud. I stood up from the glass table. I paced the length of the war room, my mind executing a tactical pivot. If I confronted him now, he would panic. He would liquidate the remaining client funds, board that yacht, and vanish into an extradition-free jurisdiction. He would leave hundreds of innocent, vulnerable investors destitute while he sailed away with Mallory Quinn. I could not alert him. I needed to trap him. I needed to construct a cage so tight, so legal and financially unassailable, that, when the steel doors slammed shut, he would have nowhere to run. I returned to the terminal. I opened a new, encrypted master file on the Adler mainframe. I titled it Operation Apex. I began to compile the evidentiary dossier. I dragged the wire transfer logs, the digital metadata reports, the Delaware incorporation documents, and the maritime registries into the secure vault. I categorized every piece of evidence, building the timeline of his fraud. Every careless social media post Mallory uploaded transformed from a personal insult into a sworn exhibit. Every shell company Silas constructed morphed from a hidden asset into a federal wire fraud charge. They believed their arrogance shielded them. They flaunted their stolen wealth publicly, assuming no one in their orbit possessed the intellect or the resources to connect the disparate threads. They weaponized their cruelty against me, expecting the quiet data entry clerk to shrink into the shadows and accept ruin. Instead, they provided me with the exact ammunition required to execute their absolute destruction. I aligned the data streams, methodically transforming their hubris into a federal indictment. I would let Silas believe he was winning the divorce. I would let him walk blindly into the snare. My encrypted cellular device vibrated against the glass surface of the war room table, shattering the silence. The caller identification text flashed in stark white letters. Brenda Hayes, Silas's mother. 60 years of inherited entitlement compressed into a woman who viewed her son as an infallible deity, and me as an unfortunate administrative error he had briefly pitied. During my 7 years of marriage, Brenda never missed an opportunity to remind me of my supposed low-class origins. She routinely handed me her empty cocktail glasses at family functions, treating me indistinguishable from the catering staff. She paraded her country club peers through my living room, loudly lamenting that Silas had settled for a logistics clerk when he could have married a dynasty heiress. She had absolutely no idea she was currently dialing the central command matrix of the Adler global risk empire. I did not swipe the screen to answer immediately. I routed the incoming signal through the mainframe's audio interception protocol. I tapped a digital icon, activating the high-fidelity recording software. A crimson light pulsed on the console, indicating the system was capturing and archiving the transmission. I accepted the connection. I placed the call on speaker. Elena. She did not offer a greeting. She spat my name, her tone brittle and laced with her customary mid-afternoon gin. Silas informed me you abandoned the house, Brenda stated. Frankly, it is for the best. He outgrew you years ago. A man of his caliber requires a wife who understands the demands of high society, not someone who organizes shipping manifests. I rested my palms against the cool edge of the glass table. I monitored the audio waveform spiking on the monitor, translating her arrogance into jagged green lines. I did not interrupt her. I offered her the silence she required to hang herself, emboldened by the lack of resistance. Brenda escalated her attack. I am calling to handle the logistics of your exit, she continued, her voice dripping with artificial authority. You will return the 3-carat engagement ring immediately. It is a Hayes family heirloom. It belongs on the finger of a woman capable of supporting Silas's trajectory, not boxed away in whatever cramped apartment you plan to rent. She waited. She expected tears. She expected me to defend my devotion to her son, or perhaps plead for a shred of dignity. I delivered nothing. I let the dead air stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. The silence transmitted across the cellular network, thick, suffocating, and entirely devoid of the subservient panic she anticipated. The vacuum unnerved her. I watched the green waveform flutter as her breathing hitched. Predators like Brenda rely on their victims' emotional reactions to sustain their dominance. Deprived of that fuel, she lost her footing. She scrambled to fill the void, pivoting to boasting to reestablish her perceived superiority. Silas is operating on an entirely different level now, she gloated, her pitch rising defensively. His new overseas expansion is revolutionizing his firm. He is handling international capital. Once he finalizes the Cayman Islands transition, She stopped abruptly. The waveform flattened. She realized she had spoken too freely. I stared at the console. The Cayman Islands. She had just handed me the exact geographical pivot I required. The offshore archipelago where Silas funneled the embezzled retirement funds. The jurisdiction hiding the Apex Horizon superyacht. Brenda intended to inflict a final psychological wound. But instead, her sheer carelessness delivered the missing piece of the federal indictment directly into my recording software. "The ring is safe, Brenda," I replied. My voice was soft, clinical, and completely devoid of inflection. Before she could process the chill in my tone, I terminated the connection. The crimson recording light blinked off. I turned my attention back to the illuminated glass table. Brenda demanded the return of a Hayes family heirloom. The demand required a forensic review. I bypassed the divorce filings and accessed my personal, deeply encrypted financial archives. I initiated a search query for the year 2018, filtering for high-value asset acquisitions. The truth about the 3-carat emerald-cut diamond ring was a secret I had guarded for 7 years to protect Silas's fragile ego. When Silas proposed, he possessed profound ambition but severely limited capital. He brought me to a private jeweler in Manhattan, pointing out the flawless stone. He wanted to project the image of a wealthy, established financier. However, when he attempted to secure the financing, his credit application returned a definitive rejection. I watched him stand in the jeweler's private office, his face flushed with humiliation, his curated facade cracking. I excused myself to the restroom, from a sterile bathroom stall. I accessed a proxy account linked to an Adler blind trust. I wired the precise purchase amount directly to the jeweler's routing number. I attached a non-disclosure directive, legally binding the merchant to silence. When I returned to the showroom, the jeweler smiled smoothly, handed Silas the velvet box, and congratulated him on his approved wire transfer. Silas presented the ring to me that evening. He looked me directly in the eyes and fabricated an elaborate narrative, claiming the diamond belonged to his great-grandmother, a relic of the prestigious Hayes lineage. He lied to my face, entirely unaware that the receipt for the stone currently sat in my encrypted vault. I pulled the documents onto the glass screen. The original certificate of authenticity, the digital wire transfer confirmation bearing my proxy signature, the jeweler's finalized invoice. Brenda believed she possessed the authority to strip me of my assets. She believed she belonged to a superior caste, immune to consequences. She, much like her son, fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of power. I dragged the 3 documents into a new requisition file. Adler Global Risk maintained a specialized asset repossession division. They did not utilize polite phone calls or civil court summons. They operated with ruthless, bureaucratic lethality, executing corporate seizure mandates across global jurisdictions. I typed a sterile, 3-sentence directive on the screen. Target Brenda Hayes. Asset 3-carat, emerald-cut diamond ring. Serial number matching the attached certificate. Authorization immediate confiscation. Owner reclaims possession. I attached the original purchase receipts, legally establishing my undisputed ownership. I did not ask for the ring back. I did not intend to argue with a woman who viewed me as a peasant. I issued a corporate mandate to seize my property directly from her grasp. I hit transmit. The file vanished from my screen, securely routed to the tactical teams waiting in the staging bays below. Brenda thought she was intimidating a terrified, discarded logistics clerk. She had no idea she had just summoned a corporate strike team. I closed the jewelry dossier and opened the Cayman Islands tracking protocol. The personal insults were handled. It was time to return to dismantling the Ponzi scheme. The glass table shifted its display. I fed the geographical coordinates Brenda so carelessly provided into the financial tracking algorithm. Cayman Islands, a heavily abused, predictable sanctuary for men seeking to hide capital from spouses, partners, and federal regulators. I breached the primary offshore clearinghouse networks. Adler Global Risk, maintained unlogged. Backdoor clearances with international banking consortiums. The digital borders dissolved immediately. I bypassed the standard firewalls, stripping away the privacy shields protecting the Caribbean financial sector. I searched for Silas Hayes. I queried the Apex Horizon shell entity. The screen populated with a labyrinth of routing nodes. The architecture was deliberately convoluted, designed to exhaust a standard forensic accountant. Silas layered the transfers with textbook precision. A domestic holding company in Delaware pushed capital to a corporate proxy in Bermuda. The Bermuda proxy laundered the cash through 3 separate international currency exchanges before routing the principal into a primary trust vault located in Grand Cayman. I ignored the decoys. I isolated the transaction identifiers embedded in the digital metadata. I traced the outbound wires flowing from Hayes Capital's domestic accounts straight down this Caribbean pipeline. The outbound volume staggered the senses. Silas was bleeding millions of dollars from his firm. I needed to identify the origin point of the capital. A hedge fund manager skimming standard management fees is a common, localized thief. A man purchasing a $4.5 million superyacht while reporting zero domestic liquidity to a family court judge is actively siphoning the foundational principle. I reversed the tracking algorithm. I ordered the system to map the inbound deposits funding Hayes Capital. Throughout our marriage, Silas cultivated an image of relentless exclusivity. He wore custom-tailored suits, played golf at elite country clubs, and boasted over dinner parties about managing high-risk portfolios for tech billionaires and generational wealth heirs. The inbound ledger exposed a profoundly different, grimmer reality. The incoming wire transfers did not originate from the accounts of wealthy philanthropists or Silicon Valley venture capitalists. The capital flowed entirely from pooled pension trusts. I opened the client dossiers, expanding the documents across the illuminated glass. I read the names of the institutional investors he actively courted: a municipal workers' union in Ohio, a state teachers' retirement system in Pennsylvania, a collective bargaining fund for public transit operators in Michigan. These were not elite financiers who could absorb a market fluctuation or a risky venture loss. These were individuals who spent 30 years driving city buses, grading primary school mathematics examinations, and maintaining public infrastructure. They deposited their life savings into Hayes Capital, trusting the polished, charismatic fund manager to secure their modest futures. Silas systematically stole those futures. I mapped the capital cycle, dragging the data points together to form the complete schematic. I isolated a specific transaction block originating from the Ohio Municipal Fund. On the 1st of September, the union deposited $5 million. According to Silas's corporate prospectus, he was obligated to execute low-risk municipal bond acquisitions. He executed nothing. Instead, he fractured the deposit. He routed $2 million directly to his Delaware shell company. He utilized $1 million to pay fabricated quarterly dividends to the Pennsylvania teachers, creating a synthetic illusion of a robust, yielding market. He skimmed the remainder, funneling it straight into his personal Cayman trust. He paid his older investors with the capital harvested from his newest investors. He operated a textbook Ponzi scheme. He subsidized Mallory's designer shopping sprees in Mayfair and funded the teak decks of his luxury yacht utilizing the retirement capital of public servants. I stood perfectly still in the center of the war room. The climate control system cycled, pushing cold air across my shoulders. For 7 years, I viewed my husband as a profoundly arrogant man. I considered his narcissism a personal failing, a character flaw. I managed through silence, tactical compliance, and quiet endurance. I believed he merely lacked humility. I stared at the financial ruin mapped across the glowing glass. He lacked humanity. He was a parasitic predator. He preyed on the vulnerable. He dined at Michelin-starred steakhouses, swirling vintage Bordeaux, knowing the meal was financed by the stolen wages of individuals who carefully budgeted their weekly grocery bills. He returned home to me, demanding subservience, complaining about the stress of high finance, building his towering ego on a foundation of absolute, devastating theft. The scope of the conflict expanded outward, shattering the boundaries of a simple domestic divorce. I could not just hand these ledgers to a standard family law attorney. I could not walk into a civil courtroom, present the files to a judge, and demand a favorable division of assets. If Silas sensed the slightest tremor in his foundation, he would execute his escape protocol. The apex horizon currently sat moored in international waters. His Cayman accounts held sufficient liquidity to fund a lifetime of luxurious exile in a jurisdiction without an extradition treaty. If I triggered an alarm prematurely, he would liquidate the remaining domestic accounts, abandon his crumbling firm, and vanish. The Securities and Exchange Commission would arrive to find an empty vault. The pension funds would collapse entirely. Hundreds of hard-working retirees would face immediate, irreversible destitution. I could not alert him. I had to contain him. I needed to construct a legal and financial cage so tight, so impeccably reinforced, that neither his high-priced litigators nor his boundless arrogance could save him when the traps sprang closed. To secure the perimeter, I needed to manipulate his primary vulnerability, his absolute certainty that he was the smartest man in the room. Silas firmly believed he was orchestrating my destruction. He believed the fraudulent prenuptial maneuver and his aggressive demand to assign me $150,000 of fabricated debt would break my spirit. He expected me to arrive at the upcoming mediation session terrified, desperate, and intensely pliable. I decided to provide him with exactly the victim he anticipated. I would walk into that mediation conference room and execute the role of the defeated, naive logistics clerk flawlessly. I would allow him to gloat across the mahogany table. I would let him present his fabricated financial disclosures under the penalty of perjury. By feigning a total surrender, I would lock his lies into the permanent legal record. He would sign his own federal indictment, completely unaware he was executing a confession. I gathered the digital files. I dragged the Cayman Trust documents, the offshore routing numbers, the metadata coordinates of the yacht, and the bleeding pension fund ledgers into Operation Apex. The encrypted vault sealed shut, securing the evidence behind military-grade encryption. I shut down the overhead projectors. The glass table returned to a blank, dormant slate. The war room plunged into quiet darkness, illuminated only by the faint blue standby lights of the server racks. I had the blueprints to his empire. I understood exactly where he placed the load-bearing walls. Now, I needed to wire the explosives. The hunt required patience. The snare required extreme precision. Silas wanted a war of attrition, believing he possessed superior firepower. He had no idea he was fighting a ghost. I would let him claim his temporary victories. I would let him build his gallows higher and higher, ensuring that when the floor finally dropped, the fall would break him completely. It rained heavily on the morning of October 16th, 2025. The gray downpour matched the specific narrative I intended to project. I stood before the full-length mirror in my temporary corporate apartment and finalized my wardrobe. I did not select the tailored wool trousers or the silk blouses hanging in the closet. I needed to embody the terrified, discarded logistics clerk Silas expected to encounter. I chose a pair of faded black slacks. I layered them with an oversized, slightly pilled gray cardigan. I pulled my hair into a loose, messy knot at the nape of my neck, leaving stray strands to frame a pale face devoid of makeup. I practiced my posture, intentionally rolling my shoulders forward, collapsing my spine to project physical exhaustion and total defeat. I summoned a rideshare and arrived at the polished glass skyscraper housing the independent mediation firm. The conference room sat on the 34th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling Manhattan grid, obscured by sheets of rain. A neutral mediator, a retired family court judge named Heiress Thorne, sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, I took my seat on the left side, placing my scuffed synthetic leather purse on the floor. I folded my hands on the polished wood. The heavy glass door swung open. Silas entered. He did not walk. He paraded. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that draped flawlessly over his frame. His hair was impeccably styled. He radiated the smug, untouchable aura of a man arriving to collect a guaranteed trophy, his high-priced litigator. A predatory attorney named Sterling, no wait. Silas referred to him as Gideon Caldwell in the past. But his current counsel was a sharp-featured man named Preston Cole. Cole carried a thick leather binder. He took the seat beside Silas, dropping the binder onto the mahogany surface with a deliberate, heavy thud designed to intimidate. Silas reclined in his high-backed leather chair. He did not offer a greeting. He flicked a speck of invisible dust from his lapel, shot his cuffs, and adjusted his heavy platinum Rolex. He briefly glanced at my pilled sweater and the dark circles under my eyes. A fleeting, satisfied smirk twitched at the corner of his mouth. He saw exactly what he wanted to see: a broken woman incapable of defending herself. The mediator initiated the session, reciting the standard legal disclaimers. I kept my gaze lowered, staring at the grain of the wood, playing the role of the intimidated spouse. Preston Cole took control immediately. He spoke with the aggressive cadence of a man accustomed to bulldozing unrepresented adversaries. "My client desires a swift and amicable resolution," Cole began, opening the binder and sliding a stack of stapled documents across the table toward me. As outlined in the initial petition, Hayes Capital is navigating unprecedented market volatility. Mr. Hayes possesses zero liquid capital. The marital estate holds substantial liabilities. I looked at the documents. They represented a masterclass in synthetic bankruptcy. Initially, the petition demanded you absorb $150,000 of shared corporate and household debt, Cole continued, his voice dripping with artificial magnanimity. However, Mr. Hayes recognizes your limited earning capacity. In the spirit of expediency, he is willing to assume the majority of the shortfall. He proposes a finalized settlement where you waive all claims to spousal support, and, in exchange, you assume only $50,000 of the outstanding business debt. You walk away clean. He shoulders the wreckage. I stared at the paper. I felt the overwhelming urge to laugh, but I suppressed it, bearing the amusement beneath a mask of rising panic. Silas was executing a classic negotiation trap. He anchored the initial demand absurdly high at $150,000, inducing terror. Now, he offered a generous reduction to $50,000. He expected me to feel profound relief. He expected me to eagerly sign away my rights just to escape the imaginary heavier burden. He was essentially demanding I pay him $50,000 for the privilege of allowing him to abandon me for his mistress, all while he hoarded millions in offshore accounts. I let my hands tremble. I pulled my arms tighter around my ribs, shrinking further into the oversized sweater. I looked up at Silas, widening my eyes to project absolute vulnerability. $50,000, I whispered, my voice intentionally fragile. Silas, I do not have that kind of money. You know my salary. I cannot afford. Silas sighed heavily. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, invading my physical space. He utilized the patronizing tone he reserved for explaining complex concepts to a child. Be practical, Elena, Silas stated. The fund is completely dry. I am facing total insolvency. I am taking on massive personal risk just to keep the lights on. I am offering you an incredible deal here. If we take this to a judge, the court will split the $150,000 debt straight down the middle. You will be ruined. He looked me dead in the eyes and delivered the lie with chilling sincerity, while he spoke of total insolvency. My mind instantly retrieved the data I had archived in the Adler Global Risk War Room. I pictured the $12,000 monthly wire transfers funneling into Mallory Quinn's holding company. I visualized the Delaware Shell Corporation. I saw the $4.5 million superyacht moored in the Caribbean. He sat across from me, wearing a watch worth more than my fabricated debt, attempting to extract $50,000 from a woman he believed earned a meager clerical wage. I stammered, biting my lower lip. I need to see the disclosures. I need to know this is everything. Preston Cole smoothly extracted a separate document from the binder. He slid it toward me. This is the sworn financial disclosure statement, executed under penalty of perjury. It catalogs every asset, every account, and every liability in Mr. Hayes's name. I pulled the document closer. I scanned the columns. Silas listed a heavily mortgaged residential property, a depreciated vehicle value, and 2 domestic bank accounts containing a combined total of $4,000. He omitted the Apex Horizon. He omitted the Cayman Islands Trust. He omitted the Delaware holding companies. He omitted the diverted pension funds. The document resting under my fingertips was a complete, verifiable work of fiction. In a standard divorce proceeding, a spouse signs this document to attest to their financial transparency. By attaching his signature to this specific form, Silas elevated his deception from a private domestic lie to federal perjury. If he submitted this to the court, he committed a felony. "If I sign the agreement," I said, my voice barely audible, "you will leave me alone. This is the absolute end of it." "Sign the provisional acknowledgement," Cole instructed, tapping a gold pen against the signature line at the bottom of the page. "It simply confirms you have received and accepted his sworn disclosure. Once you acknowledge his insolvency, we draft the final decree for the $50,000 assumption." I picked up the gold pen. I held it awkwardly, letting my knuckles whiten to feign extreme anxiety. I looked at Silas one last time. "You swear this is the truth, Silas?" I asked. "You truly have nothing left?" Silas did not blink. He maintained unbroken eye contact, his face a portrait of solemn exhaustion. "I have nothing left, Elena. I am trying to protect you from the worst of it. Just sign the paper." I lowered my head. I pressed the nib of the pen against the thick parchment. I signed my name on the provisional acknowledgement line. I pushed the document back across the mahogany table. Preston Cole snatched the paper, a victorious gleam in his eye. He handed it to Silas. Silas uncapped his own fountain pen and executed a bold, sweeping signature on the affiant line, legally swearing to the absolute accuracy of the fabricated ledger. The trap snapped shut. Silas exhaled a long breath, leaning back in his chair. The tension left his shoulders. He believed he had executed a flawless maneuver. He believed he had successfully intimidated a naive clerk into absorbing his synthetic debt, securing a clean exit to his stolen offshore paradise. I kept my head bowed, hiding my face from his view. He thought he won the war. He did not realize I had just weaponized his signature. He had officially locked his fabricated asset list into the legal record when the federal investigators eventually audited his firm. This exact document. I stood up, collecting my scuffed purse. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the conference room, leaving Silas to bask in his imaginary triumph. As the elevator doors closed, shielding me from the mediation suite, I dropped the terrified facade completely. I straightened my spine. My pulse steadied into a calm, predatory rhythm. Operation Apex possessed all the necessary legal ammunition. It was time to pull the trigger. I discarded the oversized gray sweater the moment I stepped inside the Adler Global Risk Executive Suite. I exchanged the fabricated costume of a defeated spouse for a structured, tailored blazer. I re-entered the climate-controlled war room. The glass table sat dormant, waiting for the next phase of Operation Apex. I possessed the perjured financial disclosure. I held the offshore routing numbers. I maintained a clear map of the Apex Horizon superyacht and the Delaware Shell corporations. However, proving federal financial fraud requires more than tracing the destination of stolen capital. An aggressive defense attorney could argue the Cayman accounts belonged to an anonymous third party to construct an inescapable federal indictment. I required the origin documents. I needed the shadow ledgers. A man running a Ponzi scheme operates a dual-book accounting system. He maintains a sanitized master ledger for internal compliance officers and the Internal Revenue Service. Simultaneously, he relies on a shadow ledger, a raw, unfiltered spreadsheet documenting the precise origin of the stolen pension funds, the exact skim percentages, and the true balance of the offshore trusts. Without the shadow ledger, a forensic audit relies on circumstantial correlation. With the shadow ledger, the correlation solidifies into absolute proof of intent. Silas kept his shadow ledger locally. He possessed too much paranoia to upload his actual crimes to a cloud server. Yet he carried too much arrogance to believe anyone could breach his physical home office to acquire the files. I did not deploy Adler Global's offensive cyber warfare division. I did not hire external penetration testers or draft complex phishing algorithms to trick him into compromising his own firewall. I relied entirely on his profound domestic entitlement. I cast my memory back 2 years, to a Tuesday evening in the autumn of 2024. Silas slammed his laptop onto the kitchen island. His face flushed with irritation. He loosened his silk tie and pointed a finger at the ceiling. "The network in my office is lagging," he complained, pacing the length of the kitchen. I dropped a client call. "The latency is entirely unacceptable. Call the provider. Elena, fix the Wi-Fi, upgrade the routers, do whatever it takes. I cannot manage high-tier capital on a dial-up connection." He viewed network architecture as a menial chore, a task suitable for the logistics clerk who fetched his dry cleaning. He demanded I resolve his inconvenience, fundamentally ignorant of my actual expertise. He handed the keys to his digital kingdom to a woman whose day job consisted of dismantling encrypted financial syndicates. I purchased the premium enterprise-grade routers. I configured the mesh network throughout the sprawling estate. I wired his home office, optimizing the bandwidth to ensure his video conferences ran flawlessly, while configuring his primary workstation. I wrote a secondary script. I did not install malware. Standard antivirus software detects malware. Instead, I established a dormant administrative backdoor, coding it directly into the foundational architecture of his local network. I granted my own encrypted biometric terminal absolute root access to his system. I buried the protocol beneath layers of benign operating system files. The backdoor sat silently on his hard drive for 12 months. It consumed zero processing power. It transmitted zero data. It merely waited. An invisible Trojan horse resting inside the walls of his sanctuary. I approached the primary console in the war room. I powered up the glass table. "Initiate local network breach," I instructed the terminal. "Target designated IP address. Execute dormant protocol." The screen flared. Columns of command code cascaded downward as the Adler mainframe reached across the digital expanse. Connecting to the Westchester estate, the system bypassed the commercial firewall I had personally installed 2 years prior. It authenticated the administrative credentials I had covertly coded into his registry. Handshake confirmed. Root access granted. The glass table fractured into dual monitors. The left screen displayed the Adler extraction algorithms. The right screen mirrored Silas's live desktop. I possessed complete, undetected visibility. A cursor moved across the mirrored screen. Silas sat at his desk in his home office, likely still wearing the custom-tailored charcoal suit he wore to the mediation session. He believed he had just outmaneuvered me. He believed he had secured his exit strategy by forcing me to acknowledge his fabricated $50,000 debt. I watched his digital movements. He opened a secure web browser, He navigated to the login portal of his offshore banking institution. He had just spent 2 hours sitting across a mahogany table, looking me dead in the eyes, swearing under penalty of perjury that he possessed zero liquid capital. He had presented legal documents claiming his fund faced total insolvency. Now, in the privacy of his office, his cursor hovered over a transfer initiation button. He entered an authorization sequence. He moved $25,000 from a Cayman Island trust account directly into the Nevada Limited Liability Company controlled by Mallory Quinn. He executed the transfer as a celebratory gift, rewarding his mistress on the very afternoon he legally claimed bankruptcy. He finalized the wire. The confirmation screen flashed on the monitor. I did not feel anger. I felt the absolute, cold validation of a hypothesis proven correct. I minimized the tracking window and deployed the extraction algorithm. I needed to locate the shadow ledger before he terminated his session. I bypassed his standard document folders. A man hiding a Ponzi scheme does not label his crimes clearly. I scanned the hidden partitions on his local drive. I located a heavily encrypted directory disguised as an archived system cache. The file sizes betrayed its true nature. An operating system cache does not require 2 gigabytes of restricted memory. I initiated a brute force decryption protocol using the Adler mainframe's quantum processing capabilities. The password lock shattered in 4 seconds. The directory ripped open, spilling its contents across my secure monitor. Dozens of spreadsheets populated the screen. I opened the master file. The raw data stared back at me. Here lay the true architecture of Hayes Capital. The spreadsheet documented the exact names of the Ohio municipal workers and the Pennsylvania teachers. It tracked their principal deposits. Beside those figures, Silas had logged the precise fractions he skimmed, identifying the offshore routing numbers where he parked the stolen capital. He documented his own felony wire fraud in meticulous, undeniable detail. I highlighted the entire directory. "Execute silent data extraction," I commanded. A progress bar materialized on the left side of the glass table. The Adler servers began pulling the files from his workstation, moving the raw data across the encrypted tunnel. The process operated in the background of his system, leaving zero footprint. Silas continued browsing luxury real estate listings on his active monitor, entirely unaware that his shadow ledgers, his fraudulent history, and his freedom were currently draining from his hard drive. Extraction 50% complete. I watched the progress bar inch forward. I monitored Silas's active screen, ensuring he did not attempt to shut down the machine. He scrolled through photos of a sprawling villa in the Mediterranean. He envisioned his future. Extraction 90% complete. The data stream finalized. Extraction complete. Files secured in vault. The progress bar vanished. The shadow ledgers officially resided on the Adler Global Risk servers, locked behind military-grade encryption. I terminated the remote connection. The mirrored desktop disappeared from the glass table. The link severed seamlessly, returning his workstation to its isolated state. I did not experience a rush of adrenaline. I did not cheer or clench my fists in victory. I stood in the ambient glow of the war room, staring at the secured directory. The evidence was absolute. The legal cage was complete. I possessed the offshore coordinates, the perjured settlement documents, and the internal accounting ledgers proving systematic, premeditated embezzlement. Silas had no escape routes left. I felt a deep, resonant calm settle over my mind. It was the specific, quiet satisfaction of a heavy steel vault door sliding shut, the locking mechanisms engaging one by one, sealing the target inside forever. A Ponzi scheme demands a constant influx of fresh capital. It functions as a predatory financial shark. The moment it stops moving forward, it drowns by the final week of October. Silas's aggressive offshore diversions had drained his domestic reserves to dangerous levels. To maintain the illusion of solvency and finance his impending escape, he required a massive cash injection. On October 23, 2025. He orchestrated his lifeline. He rented the grand ballroom of a midtown luxury hotel to host a fabricated charity gala. In reality, the event functioned as a high-gloss pitch meeting. He aimed to secure a Series B funding round totaling $50 million from 3 prominent institutional venture capitalists. He intended to utilize their capital to backfill the looted pension trusts, silencing the auditors just long enough for him to abscond on the apex horizon. I arrived at the hotel at 9 o'clock in the evening. I did not walk through the main portico. I ignored the flashbulbs, the valet stands, and the red carpet. I possessed intimate knowledge of the building's architecture, having organized Silas's corporate events for 7 years. I navigated the subterranean service corridors, bypassing the catering staff and the security details, utilizing the shadows of the utility tunnels. I did not wear the pilled sweater from the mediation session. I wore a bespoke charcoal blazer tailored with razor-sharp lines, matching trousers, and polished leather Oxfords. I shed the camouflage of the discarded wife. I stepped into the uniform of the auditor. I slipped into the darkened mezzanine overlooking the primary ballroom. I stood behind a heavy velvet drapery, looking down at the illuminated floor. A string quartet played near the ice sculptures. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. In the center of the room, Silas held court. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, a crystal tumbler resting in his hand. He radiated an artificial, magnetic confidence, laughing loudly at a joke, projecting the absolute pinnacle of success. Mallory Quinn stood tethered to his arm. She wore a backless emerald evening gown. A thick diamond tennis bracelet circled her wrist. A matching diamond pendant rested at her throat. I stared at the jewels catching the chandelier light. I did not feel jealousy or heartbreak. I felt a clinical, precise disgust. Those diamonds did not represent romance. They represented the stolen retirement savings of a 60-year-old public transit operator in Michigan. She paraded stolen futures across a marble dance floor. I shifted my focus away from the parasites and located the targets. 3 older men stood in a tight semicircle opposite Silas. They wore conservative, understated suits. They did not drink the champagne. They held sparkling water. They surveyed the room with calculating, unsentimental eyes. These were the lead investors of a dominant venture capital syndicate. They controlled the $50 million Silas desperately needed to finalize his escape. I watched the pantomime below. Silas gestured expansively, undoubtedly spinning a narrative of exponential market growth and unprecedented returns. The 3 men offered polite nods, retaining their skeptical, rigid posture. At 10:15, the scheduled speeches concluded. The crowd dispersed toward the dining area. The 3 venture capitalists excused themselves from Silas's orbit, walking together toward the quiet, mahogany-paneled coat-check lounge located off the main foyer. They sought a secluded space to confer before committing their capital. I abandoned my vantage point. I descended the service stairwell, my leather soles silent against the concrete steps. I pushed through the concealed service doors and stepped into the plush, carpeted hallway leading to the coat check. The ambient noise of the ballroom faded into a dull murmur. The 3 men stood near a leather sofa, speaking in hushed, serious tones regarding their asset allocation. I walked directly toward them. I did not hesitate. I did not break my stride. "Gentlemen," I said. My voice cut through their private conversation. They stopped speaking simultaneously. They turned, their expressions hardening into identical masks of polite annoyance. They expected a disruptive guest or an overly eager entrepreneur seeking an impromptu pitch. I stopped 3 feet away from them. I did not smile. I held 3 heavy, manila envelopes secured with crimson wax seals. "My name is Elena Adler," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level. I am the lead forensic auditor for Adler Global Risk. The annoyance vanished instantly, in the highest echelons of global finance. The Adler name functioned as a master key. It commanded immediate, absolute attention. The men straightened their postures, their eyes locking onto mine, recognizing the immense gravity of the introduction. Ms. Adler. The eldest of the three replied, his voice dropping an octave. We are familiar with your firm. What brings you to this event? I stepped forward. I extended my hands, pressing a sealed envelope against each man's chest until they instinctively grasped the heavy parchment. Silas Hayes just pitched you a Series B expansion? I said. He requested $50 million of your institutional capital. He claims his fund is experiencing unprecedented market growth. I paused, allowing the silence to stretch for 2 seconds. Before you authorize that wire transfer, I strongly advise you to review the contents of those envelopes. They contain the shadow ledgers of Hayes Capital. They document a network of Delaware shell corporations, offshore routing numbers in the Cayman Islands, and the systematic embezzlement of municipal pension trusts. The three men stared at the sealed envelopes in their hands. The eldest investor ran his thumb over the crimson wax, processing the magnitude of the information. He looked back up at me, the polite veneer entirely stripped away, revealing the cold calculation of an apex financier. If this is accurate, the investor murmured, gripping the envelope tightly, this is a massive federal crime. Why are you handing this to us instead of the authorities? The authorities already possess the identical dossier? I replied coldly. The federal machinery is currently in motion. I am providing you with this intelligence as a professional courtesy. Adler Global Risk prefers to prevent collateral damage to legitimate syndicates. Review your risk exposure. Gentlemen, the foundation of this firm is a volatile fiction, and the collapse is imminent. I did not wait for a response. I did not offer a handshake or a polite farewell. I delivered the payload, executed the warning, and pivoted on my heel. I walked away, pushing back through the concealed service doors. I navigated the concrete corridors, exited through the loading dock, and stepped out into the crisp, biting air of the October night. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing the string music and the glittering illusion safely inside. Silas stood in the center of that ballroom, adjusting his custom tuxedo, smiling for the photographers, entirely oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding in the coat check lounge. He believed he had successfully secured his $50 million lifeline. He thought he was preparing to sail away on his Caribbean superyacht. He had no idea I had just severed his oxygen line. The money was gone. The investors would flee. The federal dragnet was closing. I slipped into the back of a waiting town car, the city lights reflecting off the tinted glass, leaving him to dance on the deck of a sinking ship. The town car bypassed my temporary apartment entirely, navigating the quiet, pre-dawn streets of Manhattan to return directly to the subterranean parking matrix of Adler Global Risk. I did not require sleep. The adrenaline of the gala encounter had crystallized into a sustained, hyper-focused endurance. I rode the biometric elevator back to the 42nd floor. I entered the climate-controlled war room, discarded my tailored charcoal blazer over the back of a leather chair, and powered up the primary console. The trap was set, but it lacked the structural reinforcement necessary to withstand a high-priced corporate defense. To guarantee Silas faced federal imprisonment rather than a minor civil penalty, I needed to spoon-feed his destruction to the authorities. I isolated myself inside the executive suite for the next 48 hours to construct the master dossier. I did not rely solely on digital files. Digital files can be contested, corrupted, or dismissed by technologically illiterate judges. I transformed the terabytes of intercepted data into physical, irrefutable evidence. The heavy-duty laser printers in the corner of the room hummed to life. They spat out reams of thick, watermarked parchment. I categorized the streams of data, building a chronological narrative of his fraud. Section 1 contained the origin points. I indexed the stolen pension funds, printing the Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan deposit slips. I placed them side by side with the withdrawal receipts Silas authorized, highlighting the diverted capital routes in stark fluorescent yellow. Section 2 mapped the offshore labyrinth. I extracted the deleted internal emails Silas had purged from his sent folder communications, where he actively instructed his Cayman Island brokers to mask the purchase of the Apex Horizon super yacht behind layers of synthetic privacy shields. I printed the Delaware Incorporation documents bearing his digital signature. I cross-referenced the dates of the shell company formations with the exact timestamps of his automated $12,000 wire transfers to Mallory Quinn. Section 3 served as the execution mechanism. I placed the original, perjured mediation agreement squarely in the center of the table. The document where Silas legally swore he possessed zero liquid capital and demanded I absorb $50,000 of his fabricated business debt. I punched holes through the thick stacks of parchment and locked them into heavy, reinforced black binders. I applied a color-coded index system, cross-referencing every wire transfer with its corresponding deleted email and offshore routing number. I organized the destruction of Silas Hayes into a masterclass of forensic accounting. By the dawn of October 26, 2025, 3 identical, massive binders sat aligned on the glass table. They represented the comprehensive, undeniable roadmap to his fraudulent empire. I packed the binders into a brushed aluminum tactical briefcase. I added a biometric flash drive containing the raw metadata. The audio recording of Brenda Hayes bragging about the Cayman Islands expansion, and the complete, unredacted shadow ledgers I extracted through the dormant network backdoor. I locked the briefcase. I washed my face in the executive suite restroom, changed into a crisp navy suit, and requested an armored transport vehicle from the motor pool. I bypassed local law enforcement entirely. Street-level precinct detectives lacked the jurisdictional authority, the processing power, and the international reach required to dismantle a sovereign offshore financial syndicate. Presenting this case to a local fraud division would trigger a sluggish, bureaucratic review, granting Silas the crucial weeks he needed to panic and flee. I directed my driver to Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. The federal building loomed against the overcast autumn sky, a brutalist monolith of stone and reinforced glass. I cleared the ground floor security checkpoints utilizing my permanent Adler Global Risk Federal Clearance badge. I did not pause at the reception desks or the public waiting areas. I boarded the secured elevator and rode it to the restricted floors housing the Joint Task Force for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. I walked the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors until I reached a corner office overlooking the city grid. The frosted glass door bore the nameplate of Director Barrett, the regional head of enforcement. I pushed the door open. Barrett sat behind a massive oak desk, reviewing a stack of regulatory filings. He looked up, his brow furrowing in irritation at the unannounced intrusion, until he recognized my face. "Ms. Adler," Barrett said, standing immediately, the irritation dissolving into sharp, professional alertness. "We did not have a scheduled briefing. The market does not operate on a schedule, Director," I replied. I stepped forward and placed the heavy aluminum briefcase directly onto his pristine desk. I snapped the twin metal latches upward. The case popped open, exposing the 3 indexed binders and the biometric flash drive. I did not offer a convoluted, emotional narrative regarding a betrayed marriage. I provided the tactical roadmap. "Inside this case, you will find the unredacted shadow ledgers of Hayes Capital," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet office. "I have mapped a systematic, ongoing Ponzi scheme. The target is Silas Hayes, He is currently bleeding institutional pension trusts to finance Delaware shell corporations, Cayman Island holding accounts, and luxury maritime assets. Barrett reached into the briefcase. He pulled out the first binder and flipped it open to the summary index. His eyes scanned the exact transaction logs detailing the Ohio municipal fund theft. He traced my fluorescent highlights connecting the inbound pension deposits to the outbound offshore wire transfers. "You traced the principal through the Caribbean clearinghouses?" Barrett asked, his voice dropping as he absorbed the magnitude of the evidence. "I pierced the corporate veil on 3 separate international entities," I confirmed. "The biometric drive contains the digital metadata proving he initiated the transfers personally. You will also find a sworn, signed mediation document where he attempts to discharge synthetic debt while actively hiding stolen millions. It is textbook perjury layered over federal wire fraud." Barrett did not ask further questions. He recognized the irrefutable architecture of the dossier. Adler Global Risk did not deliver circumstantial theories. We delivered executed checkmates. He picked up his desk phone and pressed a speed dial button. "Get Agent Vaughn and the SEC enforcement team into my office immediately," Barrett ordered into the receiver. "We need to initiate a subpoena cascade. I want sealed warrants drafted for Hayes Capital before noon." I stepped back from the desk, observing the federal machinery quietly roaring to life. The operation would remain entirely invisible to the public and to Silas. The federal agents would not knock on his office door today. They would not alert his attorneys. Instead, they would execute silent maneuvers. They would serve secret subpoenas directly to his banking institutions. They would implement covert asset freezes on his domestic routing numbers. They would sever his access to the global financial grid, locking the vault from the outside while he continued to operate inside, completely ignorant of his impending suffocation. "How long until he realizes the floor has dropped?" Barrett asked, hanging up the receiver. "I have synchronized the collapse," I replied, checking the calendar function on my phone. Silas expected his fabricated $50 million funding round to clear by the first week of the new month. He expected the real estate wire transfer for Mallory Quinn's luxury mansion to finalize simultaneously. He had scheduled a formal board meeting to celebrate his synthetic victory. "November 4th, 2025, I stated, establishing the exact countdown. 9 days from today, everything hits zero on that morning. The investors will officially terminate their letters of intent. His accounts will decline. His offshore access will freeze." Barrett nodded slowly, closing the thick black binder. "We will have the tactical teams staged at his corporate headquarters by 8 o'clock that morning. Ensure the perimeter is secure. Director, he will attempt to flee the moment the first wire transfer bounces." I left the federal building and stepped back out into the biting wind of Foley Square. The sky threatened rain, but the air felt remarkably clean. The trap was fully set. The evidence resided in federal custody. The subpoenas were currently flying through the digital ether, encircling his empire like an invisible tightening noose. Silas would spend the next 9 days selecting custom tailoring for his victory lap, dining at exclusive steakhouses, and mocking the memory of his compliant, useless logistics clerk. I returned to the waiting armored vehicle. The coiled spring had compressed to its absolute maximum tension. I had 9 days to prepare for the release. The countdown advanced to November 2nd, 2025. 48 hours remained until the federal dragnet would crash down on Silas's boardroom. The systemic karma, however, did not wait for the government to act. It began earlier, executing the first targeted strike against the weakest pillar of his parasitic empire. I sat at the illuminated glass table inside the Adler Global Risk War Room. The overhead monitors displayed a live digital closing portal. Mallory Quinn occupied a leather chair inside a prestigious Greenwich, Connecticut, real estate brokerage. She intended to finalize the purchase of a waterfront mansion carrying a price tag of $4 million. Silas had orchestrated the transaction through her Nevada holding company. Intending to utilize the stolen municipal pension capital, idling in his Cayman Island trusts to purchase the property outright in cash. They bypassed traditional mortgages to avoid standard domestic banking scrutiny, believing a direct offshore wire transfer would secure the estate instantly. They underestimated the scope of the surveillance grid. Adler Global Risk did not merely monitor public databases. Our cyber intelligence division possessed the capability to intercept and mirror unsecured video conferencing feeds. The brokerage utilized a standard remote e-notary platform to record the closing. I tapped into the audio and visual streams, projecting the scene directly onto my command console. Mallory looked entirely out of place among the mahogany bookshelves and the antique maritime artwork of the broker's office. She wore an ostentatious white designer suit and oversized sunglasses, attempting to project the aura of old money. Instead, she radiated the frantic, unearned entitlement of a thief spending someone else's fortune. She tapped her manicured fingernails against the polished desk, ignoring the thick stack of legal disclosures the broker placed before her. "Just show me where to sign," Mallory demanded, waving her hand dismissively at the veteran real estate agent sitting across from her. "The interior decorators are meeting me at the property at noon. I cannot waste the entire morning reading boilerplate text." The broker, a gray-haired man in a conservative suit, forced a tight, accommodating smile. He tolerated her abrasive arrogance because he anticipated the commission on a $4 million cash transaction. "Of course, Ms. Quinn," the broker replied smoothly, turning the documents toward her and offering a silver pen. "We merely need your signature on the final deed transfer and the escrow release authorization. Once executed, we will initiate the wire pull from your offshore routing numbers." Mallory snatched the pen. She scribbled her signature across the execution lines without reading a single paragraph. She tossed the pen back onto the desk, leaning back in her chair and crossing her legs. "But process it," she ordered. The broker turned to his computer terminal. He inputted the authorization codes, linking the domestic escrow account to the Apex Horizon Cayman Trust. I watched the digital pathway illuminate on my secondary monitor. A pulsing green line representing $4 million shot across the global financial map, departing the Caribbean clearinghouse, rocketing toward the Connecticut escrow vault. I rested my hand over my keyboard. I had anticipated this exact transaction. While the federal authorities built their criminal indictments, the Adler Global Risk legal team had quietly filed a massive civil seizure writ in the commercial courts. We cited the immediate misappropriation of corporate assets, targeting the Apex Horizon shell entity and every subsidiary holding company associated with it. A federal judge had signed the emergency injunction at dawn. I possessed the direct authorization to sever their financial lifelines. I waited until the wire transfer crossed the international routing threshold, entering the domestic clearing system. The green line on my screen approached the final digital checkpoint. I pressed the execution key. The Adler corporate injunction slammed down onto the transaction architecture like a titanium portcullis. On my monitor, the pulsing green line hit the barricade. It shattered. The transaction vector turned a violent, flashing crimson. Code 904, asset freeze, suspected corporate embezzlement and money laundering. The silence in the war room contrasted sharply with the sudden chaos erupting inside the Greenwich brokerage. Through the audio feed, I heard the broker's computer emit a harsh, repetitive error tone. The man stopped typing. He leaned closer to his monitor, his brow furrowing. He clicked his mouse rapidly, attempting to override the system alert. "Is there a problem?" Mallory snapped, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "I told you, my designers are waiting." The broker did not answer immediately. He stared at his screen, reading the catastrophic federal and commercial flags currently cascading across Mallory Quinn's financial profile. The transaction rejection did not merely indicate insufficient funds. The clearinghouse algorithm had officially flagged her Nevada limited liability company and her personal identifying information for international money laundering. The broker's demeanor shifted instantly. The tight, accommodating smile vanished. The sycophantic deference evaporated, replaced by cold, defensive hostility. A veteran real estate broker understands the peril of associating with flagged assets. Handling stolen capital risks his personal brokerage license and invites federal audits. He pushed his chair back, physically distancing himself from Mallory. "We cannot complete this transaction, Ms. Quinn," the broker stated. His voice dropped an octave, entirely devoid of warmth. Mallory lowered her sunglasses, peering over the rims. "Excuse me, the capital is there. Run the routing numbers again. The bank in Grand Cayman pre-authorized the draft yesterday." "The capital is frozen," the broker replied, his tone clipping her words short. "The International Clearinghouse rejected the wire. Your accounts are locked under a judicial seizure writ, citing corporate embezzlement." Mallory froze. The unearned arrogance drained from her posture, leaving a hollow, terrified shell. She stared at the broker, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. "Furthermore," the broker continued, reaching across the desk to pull the unsigned deed transfer away from her reach, "the system has issued a high-level compliance alert against your personal credit profile. This firm will not facilitate transactions involving flagged capital. The contract is canceled." "You cannot cancel the contract!" Mallory shrieked, her voice pitching upward, shattering the quiet dignity of the office. "I am buying that house. Run the numbers again." "This is a glitch." "It is not a glitch, Ms. Quinn," the broker said. He stood up, walking toward the office door and opening it wide. "I must ask you to leave the premises immediately. Our compliance officer is legally obligated to report this interaction to the relevant financial authorities." Mallory sat paralyzed. Her entire fabricated reality, the mansions, the yachts, the limitless offshore wealth vaporized in a span of 30 seconds. The structural integrity of her stolen lifestyle collapsed, exposing the foundational rot. She fumbled wildly inside her designer handbag. She pulled out her cellular phone. Her hands shook violently, her manicured thumbs slipping against the screen. I watched her through the camera feed. I watched the thief panic. She initiated a call. I tracked the outgoing signal. She dialed Silas's primary corporate number. Silas sat in his Manhattan office, likely reviewing the final details for his impending $50 million venture capital injection, completely oblivious to the detonation that had just occurred in Connecticut. He saw Mallory's name flash on his screen. A man navigating a high-stakes corporate expansion does not possess the bandwidth to deal with his mistress's midday demands. He ignored the call. Inside the brokerage, Mallory's phone clicked, the automated voicemail recording engaged. "Silas!" she screamed into the receiver, ignoring the broker standing by the open door. "Silas, pick up the phone. The broker is canceling the contract. The bank froze the wire. They are saying something about embezzlement and seizure writs. Pick up the phone." She terminated the call and immediately redialed. The signal routed. The call connected to Silas's device. He ignored it a second time. Mallory pressed the phone against her forehead, her breathing hitching into short, hyperventilating gasps. The broker stepped forward, his patience entirely exhausted. "Ms. Quinn, leave my office, or I will summon building security to escort you out." She stumbled out of the leather chair. She did not grab her oversized sunglasses. She did not offer a parting threat. She staggered out of the brokerage, clutching her phone, trapped in a rapidly tightening nightmare she lacked the intellect to comprehend. I terminated the visual feed. The monitors in the Adler war room returned to a neutral blue standby mode. The first pillar of Silas's empire had fallen. Mallory Quinn carried the permanent stain of a money laundering flag. She possessed 0 liquid assets, 0 credit, and 0 avenues for escape. She could not purchase a mansion. She could not even rent a vehicle without triggering a law enforcement alert. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the server racks. Silas believed he controlled the timeline. He believed his offshore architecture shielded his theft. He had ignored Mallory's frantic calls, assuming she merely encountered a minor banking delay. He would soon discover that ignoring the smoke does not extinguish the fire. The blaze had breached the perimeter, and it was moving rapidly toward his boardroom. A second alert chimed across the war room console, cutting through the residual silence left by Mallory Quinn's financial implosion. The notification originated from the Adler Global Risk Asset Repossession Division. The tactical retrieval team had acquired their target. I shifted my focus to the secondary monitor. I did not need to hack a commercial security system for this operation. The 2 Adler field agents assigned to the retrieval wore sub-millimeter biometric cameras embedded in their lapels. The encrypted video and audio feeds streamed directly to my terminal, providing a high-definition, real-time broadcast of the execution. The feed stabilized, revealing the grand interior of a heritage jewelry boutique on Madison Avenue. Vaulted ceilings arched over imported Italian marble floors. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant, calculated light across glass display cases housing millions of dollars in precious stones. The acoustics of the showroom absorbed excess noise, reducing conversations to hushed, respectful murmurs. Wealthy patrons navigated the aisles, sipping complimentary champagne poured by white-gloved attendants. Brenda Hayes stood at the premier appraisal counter in the center of the boutique. She wore a sprawling mink stole draped over a designer wool coat, aggressively broadcasting her perceived social supremacy. She held a crystal flute of champagne in her left hand. She tapped the manicured fingernails of her right hand against the polished glass counter, projecting profound impatience. And senior gemologist, an older man wearing a pristine suit and a jeweler's loop resting around his neck, examined the velvet box she had just provided. "It is a flawless 3-carat emerald-cut diamond," Brenda stated, her voice intentionally elevated to ensure the patrons hovering at the adjacent counters overheard her pedigree. "A relic of the Hayes lineage. It belonged to Silas's great-grandmother. Unfortunately, he temporarily bestowed it upon a woman of profoundly low breeding during an ill-advised starter marriage. We recently excised her from the family." I listened to her spin the fabricated history, her arrogance oozing through the audio feed. She stood in a high-end boutique, lying effortlessly about an heirloom that did not exist, attempting to fence a diamond I had purchased with my own proxy funds in 2019. "I find the stone carries a tainted energy now," Brenda continued, waving her hand dismissively. "I wish to liquidate it today. I am booking a Mediterranean luxury cruise for the spring, and I prefer liquid capital over a soiled family artifact. Evaluate it quickly, please." The gemologist offered a polite, non-committal nod. He extracted the ring from the velvet box with a pair of specialized tweezers. Before he could lift his loupe to his eye, the boutique's heavy brass and glass entrance doors pulled open. Agents Cross and Reed stepped onto the marble floor. They did not wear tactical vests or windbreakers. They wore impeccably tailored, dark navy suits, blending seamlessly into the affluent environment. Yet they moved with a synchronized, predatory efficiency that immediately altered the atmospheric pressure of the room. They bypassed the greeters. They ignored the champagne trays. They walked in a direct, unwavering line toward the central appraisal counter. Brenda did not notice their approach. She was too busy admiring her own reflection in the mirrored display columns. Agent Cross stopped directly beside Brenda. Agent Reed flanked the opposite side, effectively boxing her against the counter. "Excuse me," Brenda snapped, turning her head and glaring at Cross. "I am in the middle of a private transaction. Step back." Cross ignored her entirely. He did not look at her. He maintained unbroken eye contact with the gemologist. Cross reached inside his tailored jacket. He extracted a slim, black leather folio and placed it flat onto the glass counter, right next to the 3-carat diamond. "We represent Adler Global Risk," Cross stated, his voice a low, commanding baritone that sliced through the ambient murmurs of the boutique. "We are executing an asset retrieval mandate on behalf of the rightful owner of that stone." Brenda scoffed, a sharp, abrasive sound. "What absolute nonsense. That is a Hayes family heirloom. Remove these men from the premises immediately." The gemologist looked at the leather folio, then up at the two imposing men. A career jeweler operating on Madison Avenue possesses a keen survival instinct. He recognized the profound difference between a disgruntled customer and an organized corporate strike team. He lowered his tweezers, leaving the ring resting on the velvet staging mat. "May I see your documentation, sir?" the gemologist asked cautiously. Cross flipped the folio open. "You will find the original certificate of authenticity," Cross instructed, tapping the thick parchment. "You will also find the finalized wire transfer receipt from 2018, proving the purchase was executed by our client, Elena Adler. The stone does not belong to the Hayes family. It never did." Brenda's champagne flute halted halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted to the receipt resting on the glass. She saw my name printed in bold, black ink next to a staggering financial sum. The fabricated lineage she had championed for 7 years disintegrated in a single second. Furthermore," Agent Reed added, sliding a dense legal document bearing a prominent judicial seal to the top of the stack. "You are reviewing a writ of replevin, signed by a commercial court judge this morning. The document mandates the immediate confiscation and return of stolen property. Retaining that stone constitutes possession of stolen goods." The gemologist did not hesitate. He picked up his loupe. "May I verify the serial number?" he asked. "Proceed," Cross replied. The jeweler leaned over the velvet mat. He inspected the microscopic laser inscription etched along the diamond's girdle. He cross-referenced the alphanumeric sequence against the certificate of authenticity provided in the Adler folio. He straightened his posture. He looked directly at Brenda, his expression shifting from sycophantic deference to professional revulsion. "The serial numbers are a flawless match," the gemologist announced. He carefully picked up the ring, bypassed Brenda entirely, and placed the diamond directly into Agent Cross's waiting, gloved hand. Brenda shattered. "Give that back!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. The sudden volume silenced the entire boutique. Dozens of wealthy patrons ceased their conversations, turning their heads to witness the spectacle. Brenda lunged forward, her manicured claws raking across the glass counter, attempting to snatch the diamond from Cross's grip. Cross pivoted slightly, slipping the ring into a velvet evidence pouch with the fluid grace of a sleight-of-hand artist. Reed stepped smoothly into Brenda's path, executing a physical block without raising his hands. "Step back, ma'am," Reed ordered. The absolute chill in his voice stopped her forward momentum like a concrete wall. "The asset is secured. If you attempt to physically assault an Adler operative, you will leave this boutique in police custody." Brenda stood paralyzed. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her. She looked around the showroom. The society peers she desperately sought to impress were staring at her. They did not look at her with sympathy. They looked at her with profound disdain. They saw a woman caught attempting to fence a stolen ring. They saw a fraud entirely stripped of her artificial pedigree. The whispers began, a localized current of aristocratic judgment spreading across the marble floor. The boutique's head of security, a broad-shouldered man in a gray suit, materialized behind Brenda. "Madam," the security chief said quietly, gesturing toward the exit, "you need to vacate the premises. Now." "Do you know who my son is?" Brenda gasped, her chest heaving. Her face flushed a mottled, furious crimson. "Silas Hayes manages millions. He will destroy this establishment." "Your son is a fraud, and you are a thief," Agent Cross stated plainly, snapping the leather folio shut. "Have a pleasant afternoon." Cross and Reed turned away. They walked out of the boutique, leaving Brenda surrounded by hostile stares and an unyielding security guard. Through the lapel camera feed, I watched Brenda stumble backward. The mink stole slipped off her shoulder, dragging against the floor. She dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the imported marble, a sharp, defining crack that echoed her absolute social ruin. The security chief placed a firm hand on her elbow, physically guiding the sputtering, humiliated woman out the brass doors and onto the cold pavement of Madison Avenue. I terminated the video feed. The secondary monitor faded to black. Silas's mother had utilized my manufactured meekness to elevate her own status for 7 years. She believed she could summon me to heel, demanding the surrender of an heirloom to fund her vacations. Instead, she had just been publicly branded a thief, stripped of her stolen dignity, and ejected into the street in front of the exact high society audience she worshipped. I picked up my pen, twirling it between my fingers. Mallory Quinn's real estate transaction lay in ashes. Brenda Hayes's aristocratic illusion lay shattered on a boutique floor. Silas was losing his most ardent supporters and his safety nets simultaneously, and the federal subpoenas had not even reached his desk yet. The perimeter was officially clear. The isolation was complete. The blazing fire had consumed the outer walls of his stolen empire, and it was now roaring directly toward his glass boardroom. The dawn of November 4th, 2025, broke over Manhattan in hues of slate and bruised purple. Inside the Adler Global Risk War Room, the ambient temperature remained at a crisp 68 degrees. I stood before the illuminated glass table, a mug of black coffee resting untouched near my keyboard. The federal execution timeline dictated a synchronized strike at 9 o'clock in the morning. I did not need to be physically present to witness the raid. When I installed the dormant administrative backdoor into Silas's home network 2 years prior, the malware did not merely compromise his personal workstation, it mapped his credential strings, eventually latching onto the authentication tokens he utilized to access his corporate network. I possess total, undetected access to the Hayes Capital internal security infrastructure. I tapped the command console, routing the video feeds from the investment firm's overhead surveillance cameras directly onto the massive glass table. The display fractured into multiple high-definition grids, providing a comprehensive view of his sprawling midtown headquarters. Silas had designed his office to project absolute transparency and untouchable wealth. He constructed the primary boardroom utilizing floor-to-ceiling acoustic glass walls. He wanted his junior analysts and visiting clients to observe him operating at the zenith of high finance. He believed the architectural choice demonstrated power. Today, that same acoustic glass would transform his boardroom into a soundproof terrarium, allowing the entire firm to witness his destruction. On my primary monitor, Silas sat alone at the head of the long mahogany conference table. He wore a pristine, tailored charcoal suit and a silver silk tie. An open laptop rested before him. A steaming cup of espresso sat near his right hand. He projected the relaxed, self-assured posture of a monarch awaiting his tribute. He expected the $50 million Series B funding wire to finalize at the top of the hour. I mirrored his laptop display onto my secondary monitor. Silas stared at the commercial banking portal, his cursor hovering over the refresh icon. He believed this massive capital injection would seamlessly patch the bleeding holes in his municipal pension ledgers, silence any looming audits, and finance his permanent exit strategy to the Caribbean. The digital clock on his taskbar clicked to 9 o'clock. Silas clicked the refresh icon. The browser window cleared, buffering for a fraction of a second, before populating the updated account data. Silas leaned forward, preparing to see a staggering 9-figure balance. The screen rendered the ledger. Available balance $0.00. Silas frowned. The relaxed posture vanished. He assumed the clearinghouse experienced a momentary latency issue. He aggressively clicked the refresh icon a second time. The page reloaded. Available balance $0.00. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his jaw tight. tightened. He pulled his cellular phone from his jacket pocket and navigated to his email application. Hunting for a wire confirmation from the venture capital syndicate, I intercepted the incoming message and mirrored the text onto my screen mere milliseconds before it populated on his device. The email did not contain a wire confirmation number. It originated from the senior partner of the syndicate, the exact man I had cornered in the coat check lounge 11 days prior. Silas. Effective immediately. Our firm is formally terminating all letters of intent regarding the proposed Series B expansion, following a comprehensive review of unexpected fiduciary irregularities concerning your offshore architecture. Our compliance division mandates a complete withdrawal from this transaction. Do not contact this office again. I watched the color drain from his face through the surveillance feed. The artificial tan he acquired on his stolen yacht trips seemed to peel away, leaving a sickly, pallid gray. His mouth fell open. He read the short, lethal paragraph 3 times, his eyes darting frantically back and forth across the screen. He dropped his phone onto the desk. The device clattered against the wood. The $50 million did not exist. The lifeline had evaporated. Before his brain could fully process the gravity of the syndicate's withdrawal, the multi-line conference phone resting in the center of the mahogany table illuminated. The harsh red light flashed, indicating an urgent inbound call on his private, unlisted direct line. Silas lunged forward and snatched the receiver. I routed the audio feed through my terminal. "Silas Hayes," he barked, his voice stripped of its usual baritone polish, vibrating with raw panic. "Mr. Hayes, this is the Risk Management Division at your primary domestic holding bank," a sterile, bureaucratic voice announced. "I am calling to formally notify you that all corporate and personal accounts associated with your biometric identifiers have been suspended." "Suspended?" Silas choked out, loosening his silver silk tie with a trembling hand. "What are you talking about? Unfreeze those accounts immediately? I am executing a massive merger today." "We lack the authorization to lift the suspension, sir," the bank representative replied. "The freeze was initiated externally. We received a judicial mandate from the Securities and Exchange Commission, accompanied by a federal seizure warrant. Your assets are currently under the jurisdiction of the United States government." Silas stopped breathing. His chest halted its rise and fall. He stared through the acoustic glass walls of the boardroom, seeing nothing. The phantom threat he believed he had outrun had just materialized inside his vault. "Listen to me!" Silas hissed, lowering his voice into a desperate, feral whisper, incorrectly assuming he could negotiate with a federal injunction. "You need to route whatever liquid capital remains in my primary checking account to my Cayman Islands routing numbers right now. Do it before the freeze finalizes." "Mr. Hayes, the freeze is absolute," the representative stated coldly. "Furthermore, the international clearinghouses have flagged your Cayman trusts. Adler Global Risk executed a commercial injunction on those accounts 48 hours ago. You possess zero liquidity." Silas slammed the receiver down. The plastic casing cracked upon impact. He stumbled backward, his chair rolling away and colliding with the credenza. The name Adler echoed in the soundproof room. His mind desperately tried to connect the terrifying corporate intelligence empire executing the global asset freezes with the quiet, subservient logistics clerk he had discarded. The math refused to align in his fractured brain. He grabbed his laptop. His fingers hammered the keyboard, violently attempting to access his shadow ledgers, searching for any hidden reservoir of capital, any remaining scraps of the stolen pension funds he could utilize to flee. He navigated to the encrypted directory. He clicked the master file. Error directory, empty. Files not found. He pounded his fists against the mahogany table. The espresso cup rattled, spilling hot, black liquid across the polished wood and over the pristine cuffs of his tailored suit. He possessed nothing. No offshore accounts, no stolen yachts, no venture capital, no mistresses, no shadow ledgers. He stood up, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He turned his gaze away from the laptop, staring out through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that separated his boardroom from the firm's main reception lobby. The elevator bank spanned the far wall of the lobby. The digital floor indicator above the brushed steel doors ticked upward. 38, 39, 40. The chimes sounded. It did not register inside the soundproof boardroom, but I saw the receptionist jump in her seat. The 4 elevator doors slid open simultaneously. A dozen federal agents stepped onto the marble floor of Hayes Capitol. They did not wear bespoke suits. They wore dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI and SEC emblazoned across the shoulder blades. They moved with absolute, devastating coordination. They did not pause to ask for directions. They carried thick, sealed federal warrants and stacks of empty, collapsed cardboard boxes designed for evidence seizure. 2 agents immediately secured the reception desk, preventing the terrified assistant from touching her phone. 4 agents fanned out across the trading floor, ordering the junior analysts to step away from their terminals, raising their hands in the air. Silas stood frozen inside his glass terrarium. He watched the federal raid unfold in absolute, deafening silence. The acoustic glass blocked the shouts, the orders, and the chaos. He merely witnessed the physical manifestation of his total destruction, playing out like a muted film. The lead federal agent, a tall man holding a sealed warrant, locked eyes with Silas across the length of the trading floor. The agent pointed a finger directly at the glass boardroom. 2 armed operatives broke away from the main group, marching straight toward the mahogany doors. Silas did not run. He did not attempt to hide. The arrogance that fueled his existence entirely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, trembling husk. His knees buckled. He sank slowly into his leather chair, staring blankly as the federal agents grasped the metal handles of the boardroom doors. I rested my hand on the edge of the illuminated glass table in the Adler war room. I watched the predators breach the sanctuary. I watched the steel jaws of the trap finally snap closed. The isolated, parasitic empire collapsed exactly on schedule, and I commanded the perfect view of the wreckage. The federal agents breached the acoustic glass doors of the boardroom. The lead investigator stepped across the threshold, raising a sealed federal search warrant, instructing the remaining analysts to step away from their trading terminals. Silas did not wait for the agents to read him his rights. He understood the mechanical cadence of a federal raid. The initial breach focuses entirely on securing the premises, quarantining the servers, and locking down the physical evidence before executing targeted arrests, operating on pure, unadulterated panic. Silas stood up, raising his hands in a gesture of absolute compliance. He requested permission to access his private, adjoining executive washroom to retrieve his prescription medication before speaking with legal counsel. The lead agent, focused on seizing the compromised hard drives, granted him 60 seconds. Silas stepped into the washroom and locked the heavy oak door. He did not open the medicine cabinet. He bypassed the marble sink entirely. Dropping to his knees, he pushed against the concealed maintenance panel situated behind the decorative wainscoting. The panel gave way, revealing a narrow, concrete utility stairwell originally designed for maintenance crews, leading directly to the subterranean parking garage. He abandoned his bespoke suit jacket. He abandoned his cracked cellular phone. He abandoned his ruined empire. He scrambled down the concrete steps in the dark, his breath tearing through his lungs, operating purely on the frantic survival instincts of a cornered predator. He reached the garage, threw himself into the driver's seat of his Porsche, and accelerated out of the concrete bunker, merging recklessly into the chaotic flow of mid-morning Manhattan traffic. He possessed no offshore accounts. He possessed no venture capital lifeline. He possessed exactly one potential avenue for survival: He drove toward Adler Global Risk. During the extraction on October 2nd, Silas witnessed Vivian command a private tactical squad. He knew my mother operated in the shadows of global finance, wielding staggering liquidity and terrifying influence. In his fractured, desperate mind, he formulated a final, deranged negotiation. He planned to offer Vivian the remaining architecture of his Delaware shell companies at a massive discount in exchange for an untraceable bridge loan. He assumed Vivian despised weakness. He believed she viewed her own daughter as a useless liability and would respect his ruthless, predatory hustle. He slammed his vehicle into the curb outside the towering Adler monolith. He ignored the parking's attendants. He sprinted through the revolving glass doors, his silk shirt plastered to his skin with sweat, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He rushed the primary security perimeter. "I need to see Vivian Adler," Silas demanded, slapping his palms against the polished marble of the reception desk. "Tell her Silas Hayes is here. Tell her I possess a highly lucrative, time-sensitive acquisition offer. Call her immediately." The armed security personnel did not tackle him. They did not draw their weapons. They possessed strict preemptive orders. The head of security pressed a finger to his earpiece, listening to a silent directive transmitted directly from my console on the 42nd floor. The guard nodded once. "Step this way, Mr. Hayes," the guard instructed smoothly. They escorted Silas past the primary turnstiles, guiding him to the executive biometric elevator. Silas adjusted his collar, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He believed his audacity had worked. He believed his status as a high-tier financier commanded respect, even within the fortress of Adler Global. The elevator doors closed. The carriage ascended silently. I sat inside the executive suite. I had deactivated the war room monitors and relocated to the primary CEO office. The space projected absolute dominion. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling Manhattan skyline. A massive desk carved from solid black mahogany anchored the center of the room. I sat in the high-backed leather chair, waiting. The heavy double doors parted. Silas stepped across the threshold, his breathing ragged, his eyes darting frantically as he prepared to deliver his desperate pitch to the terrifying matriarch of Adler Global Risk. He stopped. His cognitive processing stalled entirely. He stared across the expanse of the room. He did not find Vivian Adler sitting behind the mahogany desk. He found me. I did not wear a faded cardigan. I wore a tailored, midnight blue blazer. My posture did not reflect the exhausted, compliant logistics clerk he terrorized for 7 years. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting flat against the polished wood, projecting the absolute, clinical authority of a woman who controlled the oxygen in the room. Silas's brain misfired. He physically recoiled, taking a half-step backward, attempting to reconcile the geometry of the situation. The man who prided himself on reading complex market trends failed to comprehend the image materializing before his eyes. "Elena," he stammered, his voice cracking. He looked around the empty office, searching the shadows for my mother. "What are you doing here? Where is Vivian? Get out of that chair. I need to speak with the CEO. I have an emergency proposition." Even now, while bleeding out from a severed financial artery, his fundamental arrogance dictated his behavior. He saw me sitting on the throne of a global corporate intelligence empire, and his immediate instinct was to command me to fetch the adults. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults. I did not demand an apology for the 7 years of psychological suppression. I simply gestured toward the single leather guest chair positioned opposite my desk. "Take a seat, Silas," I instructed. My voice lacked any trace of the fragile timidity I utilized during the mediation session. The cold, resonant frequency of my tone struck him like a physical blow. He did not walk toward the chair. His legs simply surrendered their structural integrity. He collapsed into the leather seat, gripping the armrests. He stared at me, his pupils dilating as the horrifying reality finally began to penetrate his narcissistic armor. He remembered the speed of the extraction on October 2nd. He remembered the unyielding precision of the asset freeze that terminated Mallory Quinn's real estate transaction. He remembered the exact phrasing the bank representative utilized earlier that morning. Adler Global Risk executed a commercial injunction. "You," Silas whispered, the syllables scraping against his dry throat. "You do data entry. You organize shipping manifests." "I am the lead forensic auditor for this firm," I corrected, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "I trace offshore embezzlement syndicates. I dismantle financial predators. And for the past 34 days, I have audited you." He stopped breathing. The final fragments of his superiority shattered, leaving nothing but raw, visceral terror. I opened the top drawer of the mahogany desk. I retrieved 2 distinct documents. I placed them onto the polished wood. I extended my index finger and slid the first document across the desk until it rested inches from his trembling hands. It was the Provisional Settlement Agreement from October 16th, 2025. The paper bore his bold, sweeping signature on the affiant line. "You sat across a mediation table," I stated, my voice slicing through the silence of the office. "You looked me in the eyes and swore, under penalty of perjury, that you possessed zero liquid capital. You demanded, I assume, $50,000 of synthetic corporate debt, while you actively routed $25,000 to Mallory Quinn's Nevada holding company." Silas stared at his own signature. His hands began to shake violently. I slid the second document across the mahogany surface. It was a thick, bound dossier bearing the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. "This is an unsealed federal indictment," I continued, tapping the cover page. "It contains your unredacted shadow ledgers. It documents the exact origin points of the stolen municipal pension funds. It maps the Delaware Shell corporations, the Cayman Island trust routing numbers, and the purchase receipts for the Apex Horizon superyacht." He did not touch the indictment. He shrank away from the documents as if the paper radiated intense heat. "You assumed my silence indicated weakness," I told him, watching the absolute realization of his doom settle over his features. "You assumed you were the smartest person in the room. You built a gallows, Silas. I simply handed you the rope." He remained paralyzed in the leather chair. The federal raid currently dismantling his Midtown headquarters suddenly felt like a minor inconvenience compared to the execution currently taking place inside this executive suite. The man who spent 7 years molding me into a silent, submissive shadow fractured completely under the weight of his own unredacted crimes. He stared at the federal indictment resting on the mahogany desk. His eyes darted from the Department of Justice seal to the signature on the perjured mediation agreement. The cognitive dissonance tore through his remaining psychological defenses. The polished, untouchable venture capitalist evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow core. His jaw trembled. He attempted to formulate a sentence, but his vocal cords seized, producing only a ragged, wet gasp. He slid forward, his weight shifting off the edge of the leather guest chair. He did not merely kneel, he collapsed. His knees hit the plush carpet of the executive suite with a heavy, ungraceful thud. He gripped the edge of my desk, his knuckles stark white against the dark wood, anchoring himself to the only solid object remaining in his disintegrating universe. He looked up at me. Tears spilled over his lower eyelids, carving erratic paths through the sweat coating his face. The bespoke charcoal suit, tailored to Project Absolute Dominance, crumpled around his slumped shoulders. He breathed in sharp, hyperventilating bursts, the sound echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. He begged, Elena, please, Silas choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched rasp. Please, you have to stop this. You have to call them off. I will give it all back. I will liquidate the offshore trusts. I will repay the pensions. Just make a phone call. You have the power to stop this. I did not move. I kept my hands folded on the desktop. I observed him with the detached, clinical scrutiny of a forensic analyst documenting a catastrophic structural failure. Desperation strips a predator of his loyalty. Recognizing my lack of sympathy, Silas instantly pivoted, launching a frantic, cowardly offensive against his only remaining ally. It was Mallory, he babbled, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. She manipulated the accounts. She demanded the yacht. She insisted we utilize the Delaware shell corporations to hide the capital. She threatened to expose the discrepancies to my compliance officers if I did not fund her lifestyle. I was trapped. Elena, she orchestrated the entire Cayman structure. He spat the lies into the silent room, entirely ignoring the fact that the encrypted dossier resting inches from his nose contained digital metadata proving he initiated the transactions months before Mallory Quinn ever gained access to his ledgers. He attempted to barter her freedom for his own, abandoning the woman he planned to sail away with the moment the federal net tightened. When blaming his mistress failed to elicit a reaction, he executed his final, most repulsive maneuver. He attempted to weaponize our defunct marriage. I did it for us, Silas pleaded, tears dripping from his chin onto the polished wood. I took the risks to build a foundation. I wanted to guarantee our future. The market was shifting. The firm was vulnerable. I just needed a temporary bridge loan from those pension accounts to secure our legacy. Every decision I made for you, Elena, for our life together. You are my wife. You have to protect me. He finished his performance, staring up at me, his chest heaving, waiting for the familiar, subservient logistics clerk to rush forward and offer him absolution. I leaned back in the high-backed leather chair. I let the silence stretch. 1 second. The ambient hum of the climate control system cycled softly in the background. 2 seconds. Silas's grip on the edge of the desk slipped slightly, his damp palms leaving streaks of condensation against the mahogany. 3 seconds. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his loosened silver tie. 4 seconds. The sheer weight of the vacuum pressed down on his chest, suffocating the last embers of his fabricated hope. 5 seconds. You did not build a foundation, Silas. I stated, my voice resonated low and absolute, devoid of anger, devoid of pity. You constructed a parasitic illusion fueled by the stolen wages of municipal workers and teachers. You did not do it for our future. You did it to subsidize your own towering, insatiable ego. He flinched, his eyes darting away from my face. You sat across from me at a mediation table, wearing a platinum watch, and demanded I absorb $50,000 of synthetic debt. I continued, reciting the facts with lethal precision. You funneled $12,000 a month to an amateur wealth consultant while treating me like a defective household appliance. You possessed a supreme, unwavering confidence in your own brilliance. I leaned forward, resting my forearms against the desk, closing the physical distance to deliver the final strike. But you were never a mastermind, I told him, dropping the truth onto his kneeling form like an anvil. You were remarkably sloppy. You routed international wire transfers through unencrypted channels. You maintained an unsecured shadow ledger on a local hard drive. You literally invited me to upgrade your network security, granting me the administrative backdoor I utilized to extract every piece of evidence resting inside that federal indictment. He stopped crying. The realization of his own profound stupidity temporarily overpowered his terror. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. The tragedy of your existence, Silas, is not that you lost your stolen millions today, I concluded. The tragedy is that you lacked the intellect to realize who you married. You were too arrogant to realize who was auditing your ledgers. I did not ruin you. I merely held up the mirror. He slumped back, his hands falling away from the desk, his body sagging against the carpet. The fight drained from his veins entirely. He existed now only as a hollow shell, waiting for the inevitable disposal. I reached across the desk. My finger found the silver intercom button integrated into the command console. I pressed it once. The heavy, oak-paneled side door connecting my office to the executive staging suite clicked open. Silas turned his head slowly. 2 federal agents stepped across the threshold. They wore standard dark suits, their federal badges clipped to their belts. The lead agent, a severe, broad-shouldered man I recognized from Director Barrett's task force, held a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. They did not waste time with dramatic entrances. They had monitored the interaction from the staging room, waiting for my signal. Silas did not resist. He did not attempt to flee down the biometric elevator. He simply stared at the agents, his mind completely broken by the magnitude of the trap. He fled a federal raid at his own headquarters, operating on blind panic, only to run directly into a secondary federal ambush waiting for him inside my office. "Silas Hayes!" the lead agent announced, his voice a flat, procedural drone. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and multiple counts of perjury." The 2 agents approached his kneeling form. They did not gently coax him upward. They gripped his biceps, hoisting him roughly to his feet. The bespoke charcoal suit tore slightly at the shoulder seam under the sheer force of the lift. The lead agent seized his wrists, twisting his arms behind his back. The ratchet mechanism of the steel handcuffs engaged. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed violently in the pristine executive suite. The sound finalized the destruction of Hayes' capital. The sound finalized our marriage. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent continued, reciting the Miranda warning as he secured the locking pins. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney if you cannot afford an attorney. One will be provided for you." The irony of the final sentence hung heavily in the air. Silas had sworn under oath he possessed 0 liquid capital. He had successfully rendered himself indigent. He would indeed require a public defender. The agents turned him toward the exit. Silas looked over his shoulder. He cast one final, desperate glance back at the mahogany desk. He looked at the federal indictment. He looked at the perjured settlement document. Finally, he looked at me. He found no salvation. He found a forensic auditor returning to her work. I broke eye contact. I reached across the desk, closed the thick leather cover of the federal dossier, and pulled my laptop forward. The agents marched him out of the suite. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them, sealing perfectly on their pneumatic hinges. The faint sound of his shuffling footsteps faded down the corridor, heading toward the secured freight elevator where a federal transport vehicle waited in the subterranean garage. The room returned to absolute, pristine silence. The air cleared. The contagion was officially excised from the perimeter. I picked up my pen. I possessed a backlog of international tracking files requiring my attention. Operation Apex was officially concluded, and I had corporate ledgers to review. The federal justice system moves with a grinding, mechanical inevitability. It does not possess the speed of a corporate asset freeze, but it yields an absolute, inescapable finality. 8 months after the tactical raid dismantled his Midtown headquarters, Silas Hayes stood before a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. The calendar read July 2026. He did not wear a custom-tailored charcoal suit. He did not adjust a heavy platinum Rolex. He wore a standard issue khaki corrections uniform. The coarse fabric hung loosely over a frame severely depleted by months of pretrial detention. He had attempted to leverage his remaining industry contacts to secure a high-powered defense, but a man possessing zero liquidity holds zero influence. The unredacted shadow ledgers I extracted from his home network provided absolute, irrefutable proof. The prosecution did not need to build a circumstantial narrative. They simply projected his own spreadsheets onto the courtroom monitors. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution introduced victim impact statements. Representatives from the Ohio Municipal Workers Union and the Pennsylvania Teachers' Retirement System stood at the podium. They detailed the devastating reality of delayed retirements and depleted life savings. Silas kept his gaze lowered, staring at the scarred wooden table of the defense podium. He could no longer hide behind the acoustic glass of his boardroom. He was forced to listen to the voices of the people he had systematically robbed to fund his Caribbean illusions. The judge did not demonstrate leniency. He struck the wooden block with his gavel, the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous room, finalizing the destruction of Hayes' capital. Silas received a sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and multiple counts of perjury. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. I possessed no desire to sit in a gallery and witness the final gasp of a crushed parasite. I merely read the finalized court transcript delivered directly to my mahogany desk inside the Adler Global Risk Executive Suite. Mallory Quinn did not stand beside him in the courtroom when the federal agents executed the seizure warrants on that morning in November. Her synthetic loyalty evaporated instantly. She sat inside a sterile, fluorescent-lit interrogation room at Foley Square and immediately turned state's evidence. She traded her testimony, her text messages, and her knowledge of the Delaware shell corporations for immunity against the heavier federal conspiracy charges. The immunity agreement shielded her from a concrete prison cell, but it did not shield her from the financial restitution mandates. The government seized the Nevada Limited Liability Company. Federal marshals confiscated the designer handbags, the diamond tennis bracelets, and the offshore routing accounts. They physically removed the keys to her leased sports cars. She walked out of the federal building possessing only the clothes on her back and the permanent stain of an international money laundering flag on her credit profile. The woman who paraded stolen wealth across the teak decks of international superyachts currently manages the front reception desk at a budget fitness center in a suburban strip mall. She swipes membership cards under harsh neon lighting. Her digital footprint is entirely erased, her social media profiles deleted, and her aristocratic illusion reduced to ash. Brenda Hayes discovered that high society possesses a notoriously short memory. Following her public humiliation inside the Madison Avenue jewelry boutique, her elite peers severed all contact. The Westchester Country Club quietly revoked her membership privileges, citing a violation of their moral turpitude clauses. The women who previously drank her champagne and admired her fabricated pedigree now crossed the street to avoid her gaze. Silas's catastrophic legal defense required staggering capital, because the government froze his corporate assets and seized his hidden trusts. The financial burden shifted entirely to his next of kin. Brenda exhausted her liquid savings within the first 3 months of the pretrial motions. To satisfy the mounting legal invoices, she placed her sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate on the market. I monitored the transaction through the Adler real estate algorithms. She did not secure a favorable price. She hosted an estate sale, watching absolute strangers walk through her foyer, haggling over her crystal vases, her antique furniture, and her mink stoles. She auctioned the physical markers of her status to pay the lawyers who ultimately failed to save her son. She currently rents a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. She utilizes her remaining meager pension to fund Silas's prison commissary account. She spends her afternoons attempting to explain her son's misunderstanding to grocery clerks and postal workers who do not care. I reclaimed the timeline of my own existence. I stripped away the muted cardigans and the fabricated persona of the subservient logistics clerk. I stopped shrinking my footprint to accommodate the fragile, towering ego of a man who viewed my compliance as an invitation for exploitation. I stepped entirely into my birthright. I currently command the primary intelligence division at Adler Global Risk. I trace offshore syndicates, audit global supply chains, and dismantle financial predators utilizing the exact forensic precision I deployed against my former husband. I oversee a division of 80 elite analysts. When I walk into a boardroom, I do not lower my gaze. I do not silence my intellect. I do not swallow my strategic observations to protect the pride of the men occupying the surrounding chairs. I claim the physical space. I dictate the narrative. I operate the illuminated glass table in the war room, locking the steel vault doors on corporate criminals who believe their wealth renders them untouchable. The most dangerous mistake an arrogant person can make is assuming that a quiet nature is a sign of weakness. True power does not need to shout. It does not need to parade its wealth across a glittering ballroom. Wear heavy platinum watches or belittle others to validate its own existence. True power observes, it documents, it calculates the variables, maps the vulnerabilities, and waits. And when the boundary is finally crossed, it strikes with unbreakable precision. Never compromise your worth for someone who only values what they can extract from you. Do not shrink yourself to fit inside a cage built by a coward. If you believe that karma never loses an address, hit that like button. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.